All right, I believe we have a quorum, so we can begin our work session. We do not have any board in, we're recording? Good. Okay, I was on. So I do not believe we have any board and commission interviews. We do need to consider one reappointment, but that'll happen at the end of our work session. Is there anything that anyone wants to review on the regular agenda? All right, then I think we will move right along. And Madam City Clerk, do you have anything for us in updates?
No, Mayor, thank you.
All right. Emily, would you like to go next?
Sure. Yeah, Green Space Advisory Commission was last night. And by all accounts, it was a very successful Make a Difference Day. I was out of town, so not able to do it, but it sounds like there are quite a few projects around town that were really successful. Hauled a bunch of trash out of Shady Creek and other big projects. So thank you to all the, volunteers and community members who helped out with that. I'm trying to think if there are other green space updates to we talked a lot about the Green Our City initiative, but I think we went over that last council meeting. So I think that's it. And then HPC Historic Preservation Commission meets next week.
Okay.
Lots of people participating in Lead the Least, which is good.
Yeah.
I have nothing, Madam Mayor.
Okay.
All right.
You want us to skip,
No,
you
I'm
come
good.
back?
No, I'm good. I'm good. Let's see. I attended Webster Grooves. Stayed here. Yes, that was a lot of fun. I'm gonna be more prepared for next year, but it was a great event.
Microphone, please.
It was a good event held at the Masonic Lodge. And it's just nice to see a different group of people, new people, all sorts of people out there and having fun. So kudos for that. I helped on Make a Difference Day with staff. I was in the back of the service center working with a couple staff. One is new to horticulture, and so that was a good time, and it just really hit home how much work it takes to put flowers out. Sounds simple, but the effort is amazing. And then finally, Sustainability Commission's talk next week for Eco Ed series is going to be a really good one. It's a professor from Washington University in sustainability, and he's basically going to talk about different efforts that we can do, small ones in big ways. And he's going to be tying also in a little bit about health and the environment, how that affects everyone and ultimately leads to more health issues and more money in the end. So I would really encourage everybody to come to that one. And if not, spread the word, please. And that's all I have.
Thank you.
Just a couple of announcements. The commissions, Webster and Old Orchard. They're preparing for the Christmas holidays by decorations and their normal Christmas parties and stuff. PCB, we had a nice presentation from the chief and Captain Hertz about safety. So that was nice. I think the same one that she put on before last. So we set through that. So other than that, I think it was the fastest meeting we had. One of the boards, maybe 15 minutes tops. So they're just getting ready for the holidays.
Right.
I don't have any updates.
I have no updates, man.
Just two, Mayor, thank you. First is about the city's new property tax receipts, which are going to be available online. It's really neat and I want to credit finance for doing it. So property owners can put in their address and it will show them how much of their specific taxes go to what service. You'll be able to see what you pay for police, what you pay for fire. So hoping people utilize that. Second one is equally exciting. Blackburn Park opened today, so it is finished. Yes.
Oh,
that is
yay.
a-
That was pretty fast.
Yes, it's been
Well
great.
done,
So
Scott.
thanks to Director Davis and Public Works and all kinds of folks. We are going to have a grand opening ceremony for Blackburn Park. Obviously, it opened today, so it'll be after the fact, but we're planning that for Monday, the 27th at 4 p.m. So there will be more information on that. Thank you.
All right, I guess I'm going to make up for everyone who was brief today. My list is a little longer than usual, but it'll go quickly. We had a very good Lifetime Achievements in the Arts ceremony with Mr. Cassilly, sorry, and I think made a very good connection with the leadership at the City Museum in the process, because a number of people were there from the City Museum, as well as his son and a few other relatives. So I think that was a great success. The Arts Commission met this morning to continue with that. The Arts Commission has now become very excited about the new park, and maybe even trying to new park, if we move forward, see if there's some art things that the City Museum might like to help us put in that would go well with the natural landscape that the survey stuff said. So I believe Scott already has in his inbox an invitation to meet with a couple members of the Arts Commission just to float the idea and see what's going on. So who knows where it'll go, but it was an exciting morning of thinking about things. Mr. Peterson and I both attended the Missouri Municipal League Regional Meeting talking about public safety. I can follow up with any of you who have questions. It was more about Supreme Court action on holding juveniles and some of the initiatives that the police chiefs have pursued over the last several months. And they do believe that they've made some headway with the prosecutor, the family court, about holding some juveniles that have more than one potential charge. So it was in many ways kind of more of the same, but a little bit more optimistic about there might be some resolutions in sight. I forwarded all of you information about the MSD information sessions for the ballot initiative in case anyone wanted to go to one of those and learn more about it. I know they'll have public sessions. Those were for elected leaders, I believe. I am having a series of meetings with former council members about their input on the Charter Review Advisory Board, which I will then summarize for all of you as we move forward. So that's happening as well. You all received from me an email, a draft letter that I've been asked to sign on the Helper Act, which is a housing, it's the Homes for Every Local Protector, Educator, and Responder. And it is designed to have the Federal Housing Administration help our law enforcement officers, EMTs, firefighters, paramedics, and teachers who are first-time home buyers in the process. So if there is anyone who objects to signing this letter, please let me know by the end of the week, because I think would like to do that if at all possible.
Mayor, while you're talking about that.
Yeah.
I did read your email, but the thing is, you guys are credit union, they already offer those benefits to firemen, first line people already.
Oh, good,
On the market.
good.
We did about 4 years ago.
Not everyone in the country is as on top of that kinds of thing. We do also senior roundtable. Former Mayor Welch is leading the senior roundtable holiday program. And so if you know of any older members of our community who don't have family or who are particularly solitary around the holidays, will you let me know and we can add them to our list of people who receive a visit and some small gifts. Two more things. One's really quickly. Congratulations to the boys and girls cross country teams last weekend, 4th place for the boys, 7th place for the girls, which I believe is the first time they've both placed in a meet, highest for the boys since the 70s. And so it was a good weekend for those people who really like to run a long way. And then last but not least, I sent a memo out asking for some regular meeting time for a change to our ordinances, which would provide police department with tools to potentially confiscate and arrest juveniles openly carrying firearms. City attorney has seen that. Several other municipalities have passed this law. The chief is in favor of it. I think I would need a second, and I would ask that we put it on the regular agenda because we've turned this gun issue over and over for a number of years and couldn't really find a place to hang on to it because of our lovely state legislature. So I've got a second. So the request then would be to the city attorney to look at this and draft something for our consideration and discussion at a regular meeting.
When, Mayor, do you know?
tomorrow.
Okay.
No, I
Our meeting.
think I don't, as soon as available is what I wrote on the sheet, because I know we have a whole bunch of things coming up, because we're about to ask you probably to write a whole bunch of other charter review advisory board amendments. So
I'll make this first.
all right. Thank you, Sarah, for that. All right. I think I'm actually finished now after all of that. So we can move on to our topics, and we're going to start with the Parks and Recreation Commission proposed naming policy for parks, properties, and facilities. We have our Director of Parks and Recreation. We also have the Chair of the Parks Commission. What do we call it exactly? Okay, Parks Board Commission, one of those things. So thank you for being here. Before you start, I want to say thank you to you and also to everybody on the commission, just so I don't forget, because this is such a thorough and well thought out policy. So go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mayor. So the commission did take up this policy renaming policy beginning of springtime. They spent about 5 months working on it. It was a very thoughtful discussion from them. We started out with looking at a bunch of different cities' policies from around the country, and then they selected one to kind of base it off of, and then from there they took it down line by line and read through it and made textual changes and such. So I agree. I want to thank them for their work. They did the lion's share of this and did a really good job of it. And we're very thoughtful in that. So you've got the policy in front of you. I support this policy. I think it's well written. I think it really takes into accommodates the need for renaming things, but also keeping the history of why we name things in the first place if they are significantly named events or places, and also the dollar amounts that it would cost to potentially rename things. We don't want to be doing that willy-nilly. Some of these parks may cost upwards of $20,000 if you're going to rename the bigger parks, like a Blackburn that has multiple stone sign entryways. Some of the smaller parks we can probably do for $1,000 or so. So I will leave that at that, but I do want to introduce Mr. Benjamin Eckler, who is our chair of the Parks and Rec Commission, and he's available for questions as well as I am.
Right. Questions?
I have a question. The policies were well written, but I do have an issue with number 4 on the procedure. I request that the Park and Recreation Commission submit to the council any proposal, good or bad, recommend or not, to the council. And instead of only sending the ones you feel worthy, I like to see them all. This is one of the issues we had with the swimming pool issue, about who could use the pool and who couldn't. It never got past this commission to the council. And I've heard that many times over the years. Well, the commission didn't approve it, so we couldn't do nothing on it. So I think we should see all of the recommendations and with the recommendations from the committee, from the commission, if they approve it or if they, and the reasons why.
Shouldn't we follow the steps that we've already laid out for an appeal from a commission finding or a commission recommendation or non-recommendation?
But if we don't see it, how would we know?
Well, it would still follow the steps. So for instance, if the commission says no, then if 2 council members agree to it, it would make it on our docket.
Right, but it says, the Parks and Rec Commission shall consider all requests and submit a formal recommendation for names deemed worthy.
Well, so you
So-
want us to see all of them, not the ones that they're necessarily voting on.
If they have anything to put forth to, if they have a recommendation to the commission for naming,
Yeah.
if they don't agree with it or not, I would like for this council to see it.
What if I
So-
want to rename this building XYZ and no one on the commission wants to, they just wipe it away? Does that need to come to council?
Yes.
So I think that what the two of you are saying, I think actually is,
The same thing.
no, it's actually complementary rather than competitive. I think Emerson, if I'm correct, if you look at number 4, I think it satisfies, so the full reads, the Parks and Recreation Commission shall consider all requests and submit a formal recommendation for names deemed worthy of consideration to the city council. And I think all you have to do is take out for names deemed worthy of consideration. So it just reads and submit a formal recommendation to the city council. You are then suggesting that we as council follow our regular procedure and say, if two people want to consider it, then we consider that it comes. So really, I think that's just adding a step in there that rather than going straight to the city council will allow for public input and comment, you'd put a 4B in there maybe is what you're saying is
Yeah.
we'll follow our regular procedure from boards and commission recommendations.
I understand that.
That's fine. I just, just so that. I don't want this commission to think they have more power than they really do.
Sometimes we have that problem.
Do you mind restating what B would say, or B?
I
generally
hadn't really
speaking.
thought about it, but I think 4B would probably simply say that in receiving the recommendation from the Parks and Recreation Commission, the council will follow its usual procedure in considering board and commission recommendations. That's way too wordy, but that's sort of what it would.
And then all recommendations, approved or not approved.
Right. So we would all get the same memo and then we do what we just did and decide whether there are two people that want it to come forward.
So it would come to council, but it wouldn't necessarily come to a work session unless we
Right.
had a second.
Yeah.
We discussed it in work session, if it's something we want to move forward on.
Yeah.
Then we.
Because you're just afraid of something getting buried, right? Like Park says no, and we never hear about it. A theoretical park's not necessarily the one we have today, but like,
Correct.
and I think that's the future fear.
Well, I do think we can do that. I'm just thinking the liaison has a responsibility to tell us in their updates about something that maybe had occurred so.
I think I might give the chair a chance to comment if he'd like, since you all work so hard on that. If this, let us know if this contradicts something. Would you come up to the microphone though, please, so that everyone can hear you?
Thank you. So I don't think it contradicts anything that we discussed during our conversations, but I do want to point out the reason we came up with this policy was because the Arts Commission passed over to us the recommendation to rename the sculpture park
Mhm.
after former Mayor Welch. So this is really, meant to live on well past that, but that was the event that spurred this
Yeah.
discussion.
And I did, by the way, the Arts Commission at their meeting this morning, actually Jenny Starkey, who's the liaison, first brought up, they know this is here. They know about the 4-year wait. So this will not come as a surprise to them what this policy looks like. Thank you for that though, too.
Any other questions?
Good job.
Yeah, while you're standing there, please tell your colleagues that we are grateful for how thoroughly they took this charge because, I think we were thinking of a few steps involved and you all did a whole lot of work and a lot of research and I'm very grateful for that.
Thank you.
I'm really grateful too, and I appreciate your hard work. I just had a quick question. You use the word generally in subsection 7 of qualifying names or criteria. It says an elected official living or city employee living should now generally be eligible. Are there criteria for what is not general?
I think so, but really the overall, I guess, intent behind that was just acknowledging that all the decision rests with the council and that exceptions could be made if you deem they're appropriate.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Do we need a vote on this? Do we need a motion? What do we need to do formally?
I think since it's a policy, how are we titling it?
It says policy and procedure.
Policy, I think it should be adopted. It should be voted upon.
Okay, so then am I allowed to offer amendments? I never can remember.
You are.
Okay. Then I'm gonna offer an amendment that we delete in item number 4 on the procedures, that we delete the words for names deemed worthy of consideration. and that we add a 4, and that become 4A, and 4B, or however we want to number it, becomes council will follow regular procedure concerning recommendations of boards and commissions.
I'll second that.
Okay, is there discussion? I forgot, I have to keep running this thing too.
A discussion on the amendment.
Yes. All right,
Way to do it.
then let's vote on the amendment, please.
Yes, Mayor. Mayor Arnold,
Yes.
Councilmember Bliss.
Yes.
Councilmember Franklin,
Yes.
Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
Councilmember Alexander,
Yes.
Councilmember Richardson.
Yes.
Councilmember Hickson Shepherd.
Yes.
All right, any further discussion on the proposal in its as amended? Okay, I think we can vote on that as well.
Did you want to make a formal motion for that? to
Oh,
adopt?
yes, we do need someone to move to adopt the
I'll
policy.
move to adopt the amended policy.
Second.
Councilmember Bliss.
Yes.
Councilmember Franklin.
Yes.
Councilmember Smith.
Yes.
Councilmember Alexander.
Yes.
Councilmember Richardson.
Yes.
Councilmember Hickson Shepherd.
Yes.
Mayor Arnold.
Yes. All right, thank you again, and you're just gonna stay right there, I think. No? Oh, yeah, okay.
But you're not gonna go far.
All right, we'll move on to our second topic, which is the Destination WG bond election. I think you all have the PowerPoint printed out at your seats.
Madam Mayor and members, as Shella pulls up the PowerPoint, you all have it printed out for those at home. This will be posted on the Destination WG website at webstergrovesmo.gov/destination WG. This is the results of our Balancing Act prioritized tool, which we used for public engagement this past since the last meeting, really. As we're pulling this up, but the Balancing Act data, the survey was open from October 13th through November 3rd. I really want to celebrate our community. They did a great job. We had 603 submissions. I'll tell you, that's about 150 in the last day alone. So they came out really to add just over 30% submission out of the page views, 259 individual comments, for which you all have received that file with many different items in there along the way. Looking at our residents of those who answered the question, 75% lived in Webster Groves. We expected folks not in Webster to answer those questions. Obviously, our park system is used by many folks from around the community. You can see the spread there, but a strong showing from many of our fellow neighboring communities as well. On the age, this is actually one I was very happy to see, as we had a strong showing towards the younger demographic, 50 and under, very much a majority of this, which was great news in terms of our community engagement overall. 18 and under, very small, but obviously 26 to 35 and 36 to 50, the majority of the survey there. And I just want to highlight real quick that all the paper surveys turned in are included in the tool. So Director Davis and his staff, and then those of us in City Hall, entered people that turned in their paper surveys, we entered that into the tool. So they are represented in this survey function. Very overwhelmingly female respondents, 63%, compared to male at 36%, transgender and other identity at about 1%. And then we did ask about respondents with children under the age of 18 in the home, looking at where kids are users of the system. 67% of those that answered the survey have children in the home as they responded. Some of the comments that we saw included, but were not part of the project list. The indoor pool had 14 comments in favor and 4 comments opposed. A dog park came up with 24 comments. And then a mountain bike park was a notable one as well, for 9 comments in favor. So this, I think what everyone has been waiting for, how did they all turn out? This is the weighted list of the project. So I want to be clear about the weighting. There's a formula here. You all have it, and those at home will be able to see it. But it's a mathematical formula that it's 0.5 plus 1 divided by whatever the rank was. So if the outdoor aquatic center was your first item, it's going to be 0.5 plus 1 divided by 1, which is 1.5. But if the park playground features were your fourth feature is going to be 0.5 plus 1 divided by 4, which is 0.75. So this is a way of weighting the scores because people could rank. And I'll tell you that these moved around a lot during the survey as we were watching it. To give you a sense, democracy belongs to those who show up. Skate park was number 13 on the last day. And then the skate park advocates, came in and they did their voting. And that's exactly what we hope to see is, people come out. And so skate park moved up in the weighted project list due to that kind of advocacy. So this is all 27 items, and that includes then your investment ideas. I think we left that in there. If not, then it'd be 28, excuse me, yes, 21. So your investment ideas was the open-ended, what else do you want? Some people just put comments in, some people put comments with a number in. So these are all the options we presented. And then of course, those that you will see in comments as we prepare along, again, our timeline, we are heading towards our next meeting, having the ordinance prepared to call for the bond election. So that leaves us with decision points to be made tonight of what is the bonding authority amount, the amount of money that you want to present to voters in April of 24, and what projects should be listed in the proposed list of potential bond projects. I want to be clear, and I don't want to mislead the public, that obviously every list is subject to change based on feasibility, construction costs and such as we go through this process. But we do want to give the voters a sense of what projects the city is considering. So I will sit down. Madam Mayor, these are the two questions we need to know, and we're here for answers if we need.
All right, we're going to try and take these one at a time. We'll see how successful we are at that. But starting with the first question, which is the bond authority amount. We've had various discussions and Mr. Peterson's presented to us what the financial implications are. 22.1 is our limit, our highest amount. And so the question for us this evening is, what's that number going to be? And I think, are there things you need to know from Eric or anyone else before we start talking about that number? Do you have numbers in mind? Who would like to jump in first here?
I can jump.
Please.
I just wanted to clarify, we talked about this last meeting with our bonding capacity, our ability to go out. If we go out with less than 22.1, we could still be okay and not lose our ability to go out for more later because we could just pay those off in a shorter time frame.
Let me rephrase the question.
Please
So
do, yeah.
I think we're at the same point. If we were to go for less than 22.1, let's say 15 million, in order to maintain the tax rate of 20.1 cents per $100 of value, we would shorten the time of the bond amortization or the bond schedule for payments to enable to keep that tax rate. So you have a shorter period on the bonds, but you would still have the same tax rate and maintain it.
Okay, and I think one reason that people might want to go out for less is the idea of possibly lowering the tax rate. But if we did that, that would preclude us from going out for a no tax increase. If we were to go for 15 and
Correct. If you wish
and
to, you
lower
could-
the tax.
Yes, you could, if your desire is to lower the tax rate, sell the bonds at a longer period and lower the tax rate. However, then of course, the concept of a no tax increase bond in the future would have to wait for those bonds to be bought down rather than having that capacity goes away the moment you
goes
sell
low.
it at a lower rate.
Okay, I just wanted to kind of see those two scenarios. Thank you.
So since you're there, a kind of related question, I think. So assuming we went at capacity, what happens if, I don't know, some terrible thing happens and we know we need to come up with however many millions of dollars? What do we have any, when's our next available capacity? Which I know you've told us before, but I just want to hear it one more time.
So the bonds would be sold for a limit of 19 years if we were to sell at the full length. And that is what the 22.1 is scheduled at. That formula is a very conservative estimate formula. So any property value growth is going to give you room in between that, between now and 19 years, whenever the bonds are issued in that end of the schedule. You can always go for a tax increase bond. If you have an emergency, you can always use the city reserves in some way if you need. I don't know the full schedule, but you would probably be about 3 years into the bond. You would see a significant amount of room. You probably get to about $1 million, at least on a bond sale in that way. If you look back to think about why we have this moment in time and this kind of availability, you look back, 2011 was the last major big bonds election regarding the concrete streets.
Right.
And that they mature now this year. So that was about a 12-year maturity or end of that cycle that when it came due. So you're gonna see some major room really in probably 3 to 4 years if you do have other issues. Again, to maintain the tax rate, if that is the council's desire, we would defease bonds, sell the principal earlier so that we could pay down those bonds faster.
Other questions? All right, who's got a number then?
22.1.
Are you making a motion?
I can make a motion. I'll make a motion that we full capacity to bonds at 22.1.
Second.
All right, is there discussion?
And making it at that full capacity doesn't mean we have to use it all.
Right.
Right. And because even with some of the things that's on here, some of those items could potentially be, if we looked and didn't want to max out that, some of those could be part of capital expenditures.
Right.
So that we.
Well, correct me, it must be for recreation and park use.
So this is we have talked about, and I think we have all agreed that this is a park and recreation bond. It has to be a single subject question to the voters. So if it is involved in recreation, so we had talked about like a multi-purpose trail, even if it's not on parkland, it's a recreational operation. We can't take use a firehouse and put it in alongside recreation because the voters have a right under the Constitution to say yes to one piece, but no to another. And so we can't mix that way. So really, unless the council decides differently, we are looking at a parks and recreation bond with projects that must be substantially tied to the terms of parks and recreation.
I'm just I understand the desire to go out for the full bond. I'm not opposed to almost any of the projects that are put forth. I just think that if I see a better avenue to create a separate tax revenue for parks and recreation in general going forward. So I'd rather go out for less with the prospect that in the future, in the near future, we'd have a dedicated tax revenue for major expenditures in our parks and recreation, including, for instance, solar panels, EV vehicles, stuff like that, rather than going out for the full bond right now. I think if we could, in the long run, bring down the tax rate on this general debt bond, and then go out for a separate tax, it might equal out the same, but then residents would know what their taxes are actually going to.
I feel like they're gonna know. I guess I would take the issue with that last point. I mean, I think that the point of having this be just a parks and recreation focused bond issue will be, I think, pretty clear in terms of, you know, what it is that the bond is being issued for. I mean, I hear your point, but I think we're at kind of a unique timing crossroads right now in terms of how much we're able to go out for. And there's, we haven't frankly done any of these these kinds of scale projects in a while. And and especially with the pool, we knew this was going to be a pretty major investment. I feel pretty strongly that we should go for the full amount because I think we have need for it.
Additional discussion? Okay, I'm assuming since this will be written into an ordinance, we don't need a formal vote, but the recommendation of council, because I haven't gotten an objection otherwise, and you certainly have the opportunity to amend the ordinance, was to go ahead and draft that with the full 22.1. Again, that is not a final decision. We have to vote on it, and it's subject to amendment as well. I'm not going to jinx us and say we're moving along very quickly, but the next part of this then is, I think, you know, part of what you just said is people need to know what it is that well, both of you know what they're funding. And so the second question here is which project should be included? You know, we have this list of 27, even with full capacity of the bond, we can't fund all of them. And so while nothing is set in stone probably except the pool, I think that's pretty much set in stone that we'll do that. I think it's only fair for us as a council to demonstrate what the priorities are on this list. So we can do this one of two ways. We can sort of have a kind of free-for-all discussion right now. We can also do what we've done in some things is discuss for a while and then each of us submit, our top 12 and see where that list comes out and then have a discussion of that list. The number had to be defined today. I know the actual items themselves don't necessarily have to be defined today, but in order to give staff time enough to really help us put together an educational program, we need probably to get some of that information. So do people want to talk a little bit about what their major priorities are? I'm going to assume that we can just put the aquatic center to the side because we've all already agreed on that one. Is that fair? Okay. All right.
And because we went through, I don't think that we can ignore the feedback that we've gotten. And I honestly would start looking at this from the back end forward in terms of what can we eliminate and get to the dollar amount that we need to be at, because we've gotten a really strong response and definite preferences from the community. And so my first approach would be to start with 27 and eliminate to see where we get to what it takes to get to our number.
Are we looking at the back of the sheet?
Yeah,
It's the
that's,
same slide.
it's the slide and the sheet are the same.
And Emerson, it matches up with the blue sheet through number 14.
Okay.
So I think for me, before I rank, one of the big ticket items is the amphitheater. And so maybe we can talk about that a little bit.
Sure.
We've talked a lot about operating costs in general. And so I know that there will be that with the amphitheater. I know there'll also be income with it. It's a little bit of an unknown, but there will be cost. Are there other items on here that we have concerns about operating costs on? And we've got a lot, it's a Parks and Rec bond. So obviously we have a lot in parks. Would this affect park staffing? What we would need to do if we were to add these in the long term or just in the time it takes to, build them out. So I think if I'm just curious about operating costs, both for the open air theater and also for any other things on here that we think would fall into that category.
Thank you, Councilwoman. That's a great question. Of the list, there certainly would be operating costs, of course, for the aquatic center and for the amphitheater. In looking at those, I don't see any others that would have immediate operating cost. I don't think so. And it's a hard mix because, and I don't want to jump ahead, some of those also have further down the road return on investment.
Yeah.
For example, if council went forward with solar, and I know there's a lot of discussion left, that would reduce cost into the future. So there's a lot of weighing in
Reduce
terms of
operating
that.
costs, yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, I think it's important though to discuss the idea that like when you add solar and we start adding multiple solar, don't you think in the long run, we'd end up hiring someone that is a solar expert to prepare? And so, the types of people that we're going to be employing as a city, I think could change as we go forward if going down this path of some of this other stuff we plan on doing, especially the environmental stuff.
That's certainly a possibility.
Do we think on the outdoor aquatic center that our operating costs would be greater than if we kept the status quo? There are operating costs with the pool, but are we expecting a change in replacing that with another outdoor pool?
I'm going to refer to Mr. Davis. Those staffing models and other costs were in there in the
Right.
original packet.
It's going to be very similar. As we've been looking at designing this rebuild, and we have not started the actual design of that yet, but we are very cognizant of keeping staffing levels, lifeguard staff levels at the same or below where we're at now. So we're not adding additional costs there. Obviously, those costs will escalate.
Right. Yeah.
Minimum wage laborers keep going up.
But they will go up whether
No
we
matter
kept our
what, yeah.
pool or replaced our
Right.
pools. Okay.
The only other one that on there that I think may have some decent operating cost staffing time would be splash pads. We will need to go test water on those multiple times a day, even though they likely wouldn't be staffed. It wouldn't have any standing water. There are some that have standing water where you might need a lifeguard too. So that, I mean, we'd have to play with that design features. So that one could have a little bit of operating costs, but it's not like, I don't think we go with lifeguards being there all day long and staff to go visit it probably twice a day to take chemical readings on the water. It was going to be huge.
Okay.
The rest of them are general maintenance stuff.
I
you know, we'll
appreciate that.
Clean trails and clean bathrooms and such.
Yeah,
but we're
thank
doing that
you.
already.
Okay, Pam's been trying to jump in here.
Okay.
I mean, it's hard to not have the dollar amounts on here again, because we did this whole exercise
With
kind of
dollar,
based
yeah.
on weighing the dollar amounts.
Yeah.
I went through this and am looking at a few things. Which ones potentially generate revenue? Which would improve revenue in existing places? Which would lead to a savings later, like an ROI, like we talked about. And then I also looked at, and this is getting really into the minutia, but the difference between in the number between the top one and the second one. You know, some of these are only a difference of 1
Right.
point. So that was just another thing. I don't know how we can talk about this too much without having the dollar amounts. But
You have, this is from October 3rd.
so we have that sheet.
Here, you want to look at that?
Okay, so I can write this down.
Well, let's just continue for a few. I don't think so, because I don't think we're gonna have time to really dig into the numbers. So I think how I'd like for us to proceed is to go ahead and have some more of this general discussion and then be provided with the dollar amounts, and then we'll send back, you know, whatever it is that we think the top one should be. And obviously for those of you who are in the audience, that will be a publicly available document if you want it. Nobody's hiding the ball here. It's just trying to find an efficient way to gather this information.
Could we maybe talk a little bit about like the ones that seem like definites, like just
Sure.
because it feels like there's maybe more than just the pool. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but I'd like to maybe have that.
Sure,
conversation
please
a
go
little bit.
ahead.
I mean, don't we really only have $10 million? If we're going out for the full and the pool's 12 million, so we really only have 10 million on the additional. Sorry, Sarah, I know I cut you off. I just wanted to make sure we're in agreement on that.
Well, I support Karen's idea of maybe, you know, starting at the bottom a little bit.
Related to that, and we're coming back to see you, Sarah, I promise.
Yeah, so
Is that
it's
perhaps we can
This is
also
accurate.
have
Sorry,
the
Sarah.
city manager or Mr. Peterson talk about what of these things that are in the lower portion could be put back into the SIP, right? Because some of these came out of the SIP anyway. And I don't mean right now necessarily, because Sarah wants to talk about some other things, but when we get that information, maybe, you know, about the numbers, you can also give us some information about what fits easily back in the SIP that would
So,
make sense.
Madam Mayor, we certainly can. And the majority of these did come from the SIP and long-term planning. Certainly, you know, not all of them, but many of them did come from the SIP. So if they were moved to the bond, then that does free up money in the SIP. And I just want to say thank you for the comments on, it would help to know the dollar amounts. Remember, those dollar amounts were just really large estimates and kind of placeholders. If you all can help whittle the list down, then we can bring back some more accurate amounts. And these things can be as big or as small. I mean, the skate park is a good example. You know,
Yeah.
So anyway, the dollar amounts are really helpful, but if you can help give us some conceptual ideas, then we can go more in depth in that.
Okay, we're going back to Sarah now. What of these projects would you like to talk about that you believe there's some consensus on?
So I feel like we've personally, I've heard a lot about the ADA playground features. I've heard a lot of feedback about having those available at every park would be a really nice step, and not just having kind of a standalone ADA feature park. I would love to see that kind of make the for sure list. I think there's a lot of public support for that. And I'm a big fan of the skate park replacement and improvement as well. And also I know that it's not like a big ticket item in terms of dollar amount, but it's a unique feature that Webster has. And I think we have a real opportunity to make that better. My other big wish ticket item, I think, is just to keep the ice rink whole as much as possible, because it's also an important and unique feature here in Webster.
When you say it's whole, you mean as far as.
Like get it back.
in a good way.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, because it's, I mean, there's
I mean,
some major, like,
If you do the maintenance, it stays open year round and we
Yes.
make more money.
yes,
Is that a fair statement?
yes. And to be
that's-
proactive about it instead of waiting till it breaks.
The skate park, they do have a pot of money that would go towards this, correct?
Small.
A little bit. You know,
It's very nice.
grassroots is a good thing,
But
so.
I'm not
Now-
minimizing that, but I do think, I mean, I don't think that that would cover the whole, like, we.
No, but that, it's there. it
Yeah.
Should be used.
Yes,
It
for sure.
shows, community interest in it, like
Correct.
some
Yes.
skin in the game.
I think we can get funding for the skate park. We just got a policy on naming it. We can get some, there aren't many skate parks in St. Louis. I think it's kind of like that Velodrome that you got up in North County with, there aren't many of them and they get funding for that to repave it all the time.
But we're getting fun, we're being the funding. Like, I don't understand why we would need to go for outside funding for that.
And I'm not disagreeing that we're giving the funding, but what I am disagreeing on is that it should be a priority.
I guess I feel like the public feels like it maybe is, but I hear you.
And one of the things that I just, is regarding the open air theater, because that's really big, but I think that, I mean, we've already said it earlier, but I just want to emphasize it. That definitely has to be a revenue generator.
Yes.
That has to be structured and laid out there and presented in a way that it's no question that it costs to use that. That has to be a revenue generator. Because that's a big ticket and it's high on the list, but just saying.
And there's maintenance, in, rec center that needs to be done. No need of putting a brand new floor and the roof is leaking.
But if we're gonna do the roof, shouldn't we do the solar?
Oh, good point.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I have just two general comments. One is I share the concern about the open air theater. It's a big ticket item. It could be a revenue generator. We don't know when or how much. And so that worries me a little bit, given that we have some other concrete plans that could be put into place. And then there are a couple of things that I think are sort of connected here. Like if we do the splash pad at Ivory Crockett Park, which I am fully in favor of, we probably need to do the Ivory Crockett restroom too, so that we have a nice restroom that's adjacent to the splash pad. So I think some of these also, as you look at that list, maybe need to think about in conjunction with one another. And then the last comment I'll just make for myself is that, I'm fine with the e-vehicles going, back into our regular vehicle purchasing, because I think if we're going to spend some of the you think about sustainability here and we're doing some of this work, the solar stuff is to me a bigger priority because of its return on investment could be so great. And I honestly don't think that we're going to have enough solar panels that will really hire a solar person, maybe someday, but I don't think that that's in the near future. All right.
Do we want to talk about the free, the freehand comments about, I mean, I know there was a lot of discussion on social media about the dog park. And it's a conversation I know some of us have had at various times over the years about kind of why that maybe wasn't on our list. I'm happy to talk about that a little bit too, because I think that's one of those items that has operating costs that people maybe don't necessarily realize up front. It requires quite a bit of maintenance and tending and care. And so in the past, when that has come up as a consideration, it feels like that has been why we have kind of dismissed that. But I know there is some public interest in it, so I didn't know if we might want to talk about that.
There's your naming right there. We need somebody to
I'm
fund and
okay
name a
giving
dog.
land to someone to do a dog park, but I am not okay with Webster funding it. I just don't think it makes sense. Everyone has a lawn in Webster Groves. And don't get me wrong, I understand the purpose of a dog park. But it's not like they're so far outside the realm of availability that it's not available to Webster residents. I just don't think it's something that sets us apart or something that would make us a destination.
What about the mountain bike trail? That was another one that was mentioned. Is that something that we want to talk about more, get pricing on, have any interest on as a council?
Explain to me what that is.
A park with trails where you go ride your mountain bike.
Do we have that ability?
We have the land for it for sure. I mean, we have places where they could do that, but it would mean kind of a reclaiming of
Yeah.
Like where we have the bird
Sanctuary
sanctuary, we would
yes.
have to sort of repurpose that into, I mean, because it's a very different thing, a bird
It,
sanctuary
it would
than a
be,
mountain
a-
bike
it's,
park,
it
right?
wouldn't be a quick undertaking.
Yeah,
And there would be, pros and cons.
yes. Agreed.
But just as we think about our priorities, I wasn't sure if that was one that we needed priced out, or if as a council, we're like, we're not really interested in that and we don't need more information on it.
I'm not hearing any
not
strong
hearing-
favorability, so
Yeah, I mean, I
think
don't know
that-
either. I think
I
it's,
think that maybe-
it's an interesting idea, but it's not one that necessarily had kind of risen to the top of the,
Not so interesting that we need to bump other things that are. already-
yeah, I guess so, yeah.
That's fair.
The dog park.
Yes, ma'am.
So, I mean, why? Cause we kind of just dismiss that as if it's not something that's, possible, or even because when you go to these other municipalities or what have you, they do have dog parks. I mean, it's like you sign an agreement, your dogs have to be neutered and spayed, your dog, have you sign them that the city is not liable or the facility is not liable for any issues between dog owners, or you're responsible for your own dog. You know, you generally got a big, wide open area, depending upon how they decide to present it. That's like, I mean, like Brentwood has the granite gravel around, and it's a big open area, and the dog and some agility stuff, you know, and so, I mean, it's something that's done and utilized. It's one of those things that's newly utilized very widely that maybe wasn't 10 years ago.
So may I invite our Director of Parks and Recreation? I know you had, well, I'd like for him, I'd like for him to articulate, because I mean, David and I started on the Parks and Recreation Commission however many years ago. We've been talking about this ever since. And
Yeah.
so I just want, you know, him to get a chance to be on record as to why Parks and Recreation Commission has not sent a recommendation forward to us.
I would be okay, Karen, on this idea, if we make a dog park actually a destination, put a bar there, like in Francis Park.
Arcade.
Like
And
arcade.
yeah, like make it more unique rather than just an individual dog park.
I think drunk owners are a bigger liability than the dogs.
Oh, every day.
Yeah.
I don't have a full presentation list for you, but there are 21 dog parks within a 10-mile radius of Webster Groves right now. I've got costs to construct from the ones around the area, and they can be pretty pricey. Queenie Park was up to $860,000 when it was built. Crestwood, Sunset Hills put one together as a joint project for $350,000. They can be as low as Ellisville did one for $67,000. So it depends on what you put in. It depends on what you put in is going to really determine the maintenance factor. The maintenance factor is pretty high on most of them. You know, the grass gets tore up by dogs. If you have dogs, you know, you usually have that track around your fence where there's no grass that grows. You're going to have that across most of the dog parks. So there's maintenance issues with growing that, keeping it ready, keeping it clean, free of waste that doesn't always get picked up by our pet owners. And I agree that Webster has a lot of land at a lot of homes. I think when dog parks were first originated, they came in more of an urban setting where there wasn't places to go be with your pet. Whereas I don't know the numbers, but most folks in Webster, I feel, have space where they can play with their pets. And then we do still have dogs are allowed in all of our parks. We like them to be on leash, but they are allowed in all the parks already. So that's not a full presentation. I'm not sure if I answered any of your questions.
All right. Other topics from this list or that came up otherwise?
My only item on the list is it ranked lower, it's e-vehicle purchases that could be put back into the SIP. And then some of the lower dollar amounts, you know, like the walking paths, I think that's only 110,000. That can be put back into the SIP. Because I consider those small dollar.
Are we thinking next steps, we're gonna bring kind of our own prioritized list or what, like?
So I was just jotting that down. Here's what I propose. And the city manager and I have talked about this a little bit. Is that get distributed to us. I can hear you all the way over here.
Sorry.
That distributed to us is this list. If we can put the price tags back on, that would be great. And maybe any recommendations about things that might go back into the SIP.
Certainly.
And then each of us will send in our top, what do you want to say, 12?
Can we do a balancing act for ourselves?
Okay, or yeah, or we can do, you can do that. We can do it that way.
Yeah, I mean, I've done it
Yeah.
twice, but I'll do it again, so I have my own results.
Yeah, that's,
But
I mean,
the-
we could do that again. Yeah, that's fine. And then we would all have,
Yeah, I
and
think
one more thing. Just like, what do you do at the end of that is hard.
Well,
'cause it's like
So
kind of
my objection to that, and that's not really an objection, that's too strong a word, is I don't think we should mess around with the numbers associated with each project if we do that.
Yeah.
it's like shopping.
I get it, but we're trying to get to some consensus here. And if you're changing the amount
true.
on one thing,
I'm not gonna do that.
oh,
I'm gonna
okay.
say There's no bartering, going with the price tag.
Not eBay.
I just feel like that is the most concrete way.
Stop it.
It would be very helpful for me to do that because I have so many opinions that I need to know what I'm working on.
So Madam Mayor, I
Go.
would suggest that we put this list of 27 without the dollar amounts and that we allow you to rank them instead of just the full balancing act, that you all rank the 27 in order. That would then allow us, and I'm happy to share this PowerPoint back with the dollar amounts. We can easily do that. But it would be really helpful if you all looked at them without the dollar amounts and just gave us your top project ideas, because then we can work into the dollar amounts.
Oh, we did that.
Well, not everybody.
Well, and
Is it a
when,
different list? Like, has the
but
list changed?
we did something like that, but we didn't have any of the public input then.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
remember, we're operating with a wider range of
No, that's-
information now.
I don't mind doing it, but so we're doing like something similar to what we did before, but now we have more to inform our rankings.
And without a full survey and questions, I mean, literally just giving you this so that you all can rank them, like a Survey Monkey ranking.
I still like having the dollar amounts,
I can put the dollar amounts in. That's,
like both, like a ranking.
I
but
would like
also-
to see the down.
we can put the dollar amounts, ranking tool. All right.
Do what you did last time.
But we all have to do it.
All right.
I like
We're
what
not,
you're doing. You
we're
got
not
that.
going to come up with
You can be
something
like-
that every single one of us loves in terms of the system. So may we delegate that to Dr. Peoples? She's got input from all of us now about what we want. She is going to provide us with a tool.
So Madam Mayor, yes, and I am going to ask that it not necessarily be anonymous, because the problem is we haven't received feedback from everybody, and sometimes people do it more than once. It would be really nice.
No, absolutely.
No.
So I think we need to all agree. We all need to agree on a few things. One is you will do this one time and you will do it completely. You will put your name on it and we will be given a deadline and we will meet the deadline that we are given to do this.
Because we need to make decisions next meeting, right?
I think that sounds glorious.
And you will give us our own results.
Yes.
Give this back. to us.
So you can have your own results back.
We will have everyone's results because this has to be a public document, right? So we cannot hide this from the public. So we will all know what everyone else did.
Yes.
Perfect.
All right, we have one last item for our work session. Let me find the right sheet here. Debbie Sahlberg is the current chair of the Board of Adjustment. She served one term and wishes to be considered for reappointment. Does the council wish to reappoint? All right, that is a uniform answer. All right, we will take a couple of minutes break and we will come back for now a jam-packed regular meeting. So thank you all for being here. We will be right back in just a few minutes. It's stretch our legs for a second.
Yes.
And we are recording. Okay. All right. Welcome to the regular meeting of November 7th for the Webster Grove City Council. We welcome questions, ideas, comments from persons in attendance. Members of the audience may, however, comment only when recognized by the mayor. We ask that comments be limited to 3 minutes in order to complete the agenda within a reasonable time. Comments concerning items not on the agenda should be included during the remarks of visitors portion of our agenda. If you would like to speak during the public hearing, which we are having on the House and Marvin Court, you do need to fill out a speaker's card. If you are speaking during our general public comments, you also need to fill out a speaker's card. If you want to speak in both places, I need 2 cards from you. So, all got that? Okay. All right, I believe we will start with the call of the roll.
Yes, Mayor. Mayor Arnold,
Here.
Councilmember Bliss,
Here.
Councilmember Franklin,
Here.
Councilmember Smith,
Here.
Councilmember Alexander,
Here.
Councilmember Richardson, Councilmember Hickson Shepherd.
Here.
All right, we will begin with our public hearing, which is on the designation, the structure and surrounding property as a city designated historic structure located at 15 Marvin Court. And we now will open the public hearing and begin with a presentation from our Director of Planning.
Good evening. You have before you this evening a public hearing in regards to a historic structure. It's been a short time since you've last had one of these that we did for all the Lustron homes. This is a little bit different because it's very specific to one particular piece of property. But my plan is to briefly go through the consideration that the Historic Preservation Commission had as they brought this forward to you with a recommendation of approval. It was unanimous decision from the Historic Preservation Commission. I'm going to go through briefly the different pieces of evidence which are put on the record, and then they're put as a part of the ordinance that would be voted on for the approval. But I do also want to just make sure that time is spent by speakers who are going to talk about how they unearthed some of this information that led to the recommendation for the nomination. So you can see we are doing this as a local historic designation. It's not National Register at this level, but many of our local end up becoming national at some point in time. There is a series of criteria that our Historic Preservation Commission has to consider. In order to nominate it, you only need to qualify for one of any of these criteria. The commission determined that there were 4 criteria that this particular property fell under. The first one was that its character, interest, or value as a part of the development, heritage, or cultural characteristics of the community, county, state, or country. The second one was its identification with a person or persons who significantly contributed to the development of the community, country, state, or county, state, or country. And then it's a potential to yield information important to history and prehistory. And I apologize, there was one more they had added and I forgot to underline it. It was also the in the ordinance. I'll have to go look over at it. Go look. Sorry, that one was considered differently. Its location as a site of a significant local, county, state, or national event was the 4th one that they considered it under. This is a very extensive list of all the documentation that was gathered. When we get to the end of the hearing, the city attorney will just essentially state that this is on the record, that these are all of the documents that we have put in the record as a part of the closing of the public hearing. But I wanted to go through just briefly a couple of the key elements in regards to this history and this timeline. The documentation starts back at 1955 and makes its way through into the 1960s. We added, as the discussion occurred, different elements that helped to tell the story and the history and what had occurred on this particular piece of property. So you have here the aerial photographs of today and from 1955 outlining the particular property that is under consideration for the designation. You can see in 1955, there is an area that was starting to be cleared for this particular subdivision to be built. And then you can see in the aerial today where all of that is no longer in place and now is essentially an industrial park. So the history of the property includes that Mr. Benny Gordon applied for a subdivision for a new 13-lot development within the city of Webster Groves. It was reviewed and approved by the Planning Commission in February of 1955, and then approved by the City Council in April of 1955. He took that subdivision that he'd applied for and recorded it with St. Louis County in May of 1955. He then attempted to apply for the permit to build 15 Marvin Court. And at that time, the building commissioner determined that they couldn't build it with the orientation of how they wanted to build it, and required them to go to the Board of Adjustment to get permission to build it in the orientation that they did. Board of Adjustment approved it, and March 8th of 1956, the building permit was turned in for that particular house, which was intended to be the model home. There were a number of articles that we were able to find regarding this new subdivision, regarding some of the interest that they were having. Most of the articles were in the St. Louis Argus. Very few of them were in the Post-Dispatch at that time. You can see here quite a few various ads in regards to, in particular, because this was the model home, the opportunity to go view this model home that had been constructed. So we did put all of those in that we were able to find. And then we do have the documentation that Melvin and Thyra Bonds put a contract on the display home in July of 1956. Additional information then shows that the purchase date was January of 1957. We did also find some additional information on Mr. Gordon's realty company, and they had an office in Webster Groves. We also did do some additional research that isn't a part of this, that showed that over the years he attempted 2 other times to do some rezonings for subdivisions shortly after this that also were denied. The property then went through a request from the Land Clearance Redevelopment Authority as part of their urban renewal program. And their plan was to raise a total of 80 homes for a new 106-acre project, which included this new proposed industrial area. There were, including Mr. Gordon, picketed in regards to the concerns over what was happening with those that were being displaced, whether they were able to get homes, whether they were getting a fair price for their homes, and the ability that most of them were not able to find homes in Webster Groves after they were out of the homes for this for the overall urban renewal program. So in April of 1964 and May of 1964, the Land Clearance Redevelopment Authority went before the Plan Commission and requested a rezoning of the entire area north of this particular home, and included completely rezoning the rest of the subdivision, which would essentially leave just this home as the only one left of the entire subdivision. The City Council had a series of hearings from June 1964 through October of 1964. We put the minutes for all of those into your packets, so you can see the progression, the concerns that the bonds had, that they weren't notified, some of the concerns related to the area that was going to be developed around them, that was going to now be industrial and not single-family residential.
So more, I'm sorry to disturb you, but so therefore, can you go back one?
Yes.
One more.
One more.
So does this include the development that was approved by City Council? And then later on, the Land Clearance Redevelopment came and just took that land?
So the Land Clearance Redevelopment Authority requested this rezoning. So that boundary to light industrial, or to our industrial district, that was what they started their request in the 1960s. So this is that is the exact piece of land that they came to Plan Commission and said that they had a plan for urban renewal, and they wanted to rezone all of the homes that were currently in that area to industrial.
Although City Hall had already approved it, then they came away and took it away?
Yes.
Yes.
without notification and things of that nature.
There's a lot of documentation that they believe that certain notification was not met. And then the city council kept pushing hearings back in order to either hold off on their conversation or to provide additional time to re-notify.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm trying to understand the timeline a little bit. So city council approves the subdivision in 1955. Land clearance comes in 1964 and rezones everything. In between those 9 years, one house was built. There were applications for 2 additional houses to be built, but they were denied.
No, there were no applications for any additional homes.
Do we know why there were no additional applications?
So some of the history, I wasn't able to find as much specific documentation, but the knowledge and the history of other things that were found, as well as through the court case, identified that there were residents around that put their houses on the market, that there was pressure by residents to put onto the banks to no longer lend him the money to continue to then apply for the additional homes. For us, it's a little harder on the historic preservation side of finding exactly what we need. So that documentation isn't necessarily in there, other than it's in part of the court case and the conversation at the court case. But for us, it was important to identify that, Mr. Gordon's redevelopment company was the only one in this region at that time that was exclusively trying to focus on creating subdivisions for Black residents, African-American residents. And he continued to do things that also worked with veterans. And all of his focus was to work on that. And so that was why our historic preservation element added that piece that we could document. And then the documentation of the fact that it's the only remaining piece of what had been approved and then taken away.
I don't, so just so I'm clear, I don't remember when the Supreme Court case came out that eliminated the white covenants on deeds. Was he planning on putting a black covenant in there?
No, and that was 1948, and then the Fair Housing Act then removed them all in 1960.
Okay. So, but the intention was that he was building, his intention, at least stated intention, was that he was building for Black residents.
Can I?
No.
interject?
No. Go ahead.
One of the things that you'll see in the packets, and it's part of what Reverend Noon has put together, is there's no statement that he was going to build exclusively for Black residents. However, there are advertisements in Black-owned newspapers, so that you can infer that there certainly was a demand that he was trying to meet among Black residents in Webster Grove.
And the other thing to keep in mind is that this was a historically Black area. It was unincorporated St. Louis County. Black people had lived in these areas for years since the end of slavery, where they could live there without being enslaved, but they had to live in those areas because the covenant restrictions prevented them from living anywhere else in Webster that was around that area. So he wasn't just building for Blacks, he was trying to help the residents that already lived there remain there.
Gotcha. What's that article about the Webster Groves Negroes picket?
So this was because of the element that was going on in regards to the Land Clearance Redevelopment Authority. They had started removing people from their homes in order to start this project, this big 80-home, 106-acre project. And so the picketing was happening in regards to the fact that there wasn't a guarantee of where they were going to be able to go, how much money, that they were getting a fair price for the homes that were being done. And so, and Mr. Gordon was one of those that was in this article in regards to that, the picketing that was happening.
The previous picture, the previous slide where you showed a picture of Benny, who are all those other people?
So these are those that were working in his company at the time. And so this was, I think, a holiday party. There was another one that we saw that was a holiday party. We have a couple different things in the article. But this one specifically says it's the realty company that bears his name. These are his sales personnel. They were in a conference room in the Farm and Home Savings and Loan Association. So that's the bank at Gore and Lockwood. He had offices on North Elm at the time.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
And before you move on, so Mr. Gordon had already had financing through Roosevelt Bank for his development.
Yes, that's my understanding, is he had already financed it. And then as pressure was being put on the bank, they removed, and again, harder to find articles on some of those things. So with this, I try to keep to what we were able to find. And then there's elements of the story between that others can tell, which I want to make sure to give them time to speak.
Thank you.
So I'm just going to briefly go through the last couple of slides. So just as the city council approved the rezoning of all the property around it, including the whole rest of the subdivision in October of 1964. And then the court case that was taken on ended with a denial of a motion for rehearing, as well as any attempt to transfer it to the Supreme Court. And the application to transfer was denied in 1968. There's a photograph of the house. So the documentation is related to this particular site and the house as a local historic structure. You'll see they're the only ones with Marvin Court. The rest of the street was vacated as a part of the rezoning. So I'm going to kind of leave it at that. If there's other questions, again, it was recommended unanimously to move forward to the council by the Historic Preservation Commission.
All right, the applicant is Ms. Gail Jones, who is with us today. She has decided that Pastor Dave Denoon and Councilmember Emerson Smith will use her time. We're going to start with Mr. Denoon. I'm sorry, Reverend Doctor. Reverend Mr. Okay. Okay. Reverend Mr. Denoon, please.
Thank you. Good evening. In November of 2022, a classmate of Cassandra Bonds dropped off his Sunday school photo album with pictures of his class from 1958 to 1968. In the photos from 1962, 64, and 66, little Cassandra was seated in the front row, the only Black child in our 9:30 a.m. Sunday school class. Her mother, Thyra Bonds, was in the photo in 1968 as the classroom teacher. Not knowing about the Bonds family, I did some research and discovered that Thyra Bonds and her husband, Melvin, had joined my church in 1961. And shortly thereafter, in around 1965, it looks like, they had sued the city of Webster Groves after the city had decided to rezone the property around their home from residential to industrial and to make their nearest neighbors a sprawling set of warehouses. The Bonds family argued that the rezoning was illegal and that by doing so, the city had reduced the value of their home, which had been designed as a demonstration home, as you learned a little while ago, for a subdivision conceived by the real estate developer Benny Gordon Jr., who had named his cul-de-sac after his son Marvin Court. The Bonds fought until 1968, when an appeals court ruled in favor of the city and their case was refused any further appeal or transfer to a higher court. Now, this is as much as I knew on January 29th, 2023, when I preached a sermon
about the situation that the Bonses had experienced and wondered aloud about what had become of the Bonds family. 2 weeks later, the church historian brought me a copy of the program from Thyra Bond's homegoing service at my church in 2005. She died in the living room of 15 Marvin Court, a property the dignity of which she defended through numerous appeals to the city over the years, even to the extent of just getting a street sign put up to indicate that the street that she lived on was actually a street and not her driveway. Mrs. Bonds was admirably tenacious, a quality which no doubt was inherent to her character, but which also proved itself in her career with the U.S. Department of Defense. She and her family had proposed to move into a neighborhood and to be the pioneers of that neighborhood, which would be, by all indications, the first truly planned middle-class African-American neighborhood in Webster Groves. And their neighbors wouldn't hear of it. Benny Gordon Jr., in an interview for the book Lift Every Voice, recalls how the crushing blow to Roosevelt Federal Savings and Loan led him to have to withdraw his plans for the subdivision. He said it took the taste for it right out of his spirit for quite a long time. Okay, so my questions about what became of the Bonds family have been answered. Mr. and Mrs. Bonds both have passed on, as well as their daughter Cassandra, I am sad to say. But just as in week 2 after my sermon, the historian of the church brought me that service bulletin, in week 3, she appeared in my office with a copy of the Webster Kirkwood Times, which had on its front page a photograph of my friend Gail Bonds Jones. She's the daughter of that couple who bought 15 Marvin Court, and she moved back in there after her mother died. In the 3rd paragraph of that article, Gail gave a shout out to First Congregational Church of Webster Groves, the church in which she'd grown up. Believing as I do that the unstated intention of the city of Webster Groves in 1964 with the rezoning was to coerce the Bonds family to leave the otherwise white neighborhood in which they had settled. And furthermore, suspecting as I do that some enterprising warehouse owner in the Kirkham Industrial Court might just get the idea to purchase 15 Marvin Court someday and make the rezoning of what once was the easternmost portion of North Webster complete, I approach you now in support of the resolution before the City Council recommended from the Historic Preservation Commission to establish 15 Marvin Court as a historic building of the city of Webster Groves. Thank you.
Thank you.
Reverend, I don't know how much of the details you know. Can you explain to me what happened in those 9 years from the date of when the subdivision was approved to the land clearance in 1964?
So the subdivision was approved in 1955. Building began in 1956, and a sale was completed in 1957.
Sorry
Yeah,
to
go ahead. You
I
can.
was just gonna ask, why were no other houses built in that time frame? Can you help me understand that?
Mara offered you a really good insight. What Benny Gordon says in that interview that I was talking about in the article is that the neighbors along Newport Avenue and Lafayette, immediately adjoining the neighborhood that he was proposing to put in said literally not in my backyard to Roosevelt Federal Savings and Loan. And Roosevelt Federal withdrew their financial support, even to the extent Mr. Gordon said that he was not going to be able to pave his road, be able to pave Marvin Court. So, you know, had he been able to build a full street, maybe something could have gone forward, but everything just fell apart. And without funding, he couldn't move forward with the project. It stayed there until 1964 when the rezoning was approved.
Understood. Thank you.
Mhm.
Right, thank you. Are there questions for the applicant or comments from council? Emerson?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Just hearing a part of Webster's history back in that time should bring shame to us. We have a quest for affordable housing. As long as I've been knowing you, active with the Northwestern Neighborhood Coalition, that we need to find some affordable housing. And you can see back in Benny Gordon's time that he had that same dream, but that dream was crushed, you know, by pretty much the city of Webster Groves. And that land that he had acquired, you know, it was, in my opinion, it was basically stolen from him by legal mumbo jumbo, you know. So that's something, this history is something that Webster Groves need to know. They need to own up to it, be aware that, you know, affordable housing was not a new tagline. It's something that happened back in the 1960s that we would not permit to happen. You know, so I'm grateful for Benny Gordon and Jones, the families that was there, and it's heartbreaking to know that that happened in our community. We can continue to start talking about affordable housing and what affordable housing look like, but at least for the last 15 years, I guess, that we've been talking about it, nothing has been done. And we had a prime opportunity back in the 60s to make that happen, and it was bombed. It just wasn't to be. It was not allowed, just because of who the Black residents of Webster were. I tell a story. When I moved to Webster, or I guess back in the 80s, individuals, and I live in North Webster, individuals tell me, oh yeah, North Webster this, North Webster that. I drove around the city to find this street sign that says entering North Webster. You know, but you know, North Webster is Webster. And we have that imaginary line in our minds. We need to do this in North Webster. We need to do that in North Webster. But affordable housing is needed all over Webster. It's just not one part of the city. And that's where we should move for. If nothing else, in the name of Benny Gordon, just to make this happen, to really find affordable housing. We tried it with the development we wanted in last 2 years, I guess. It was voted down, but we need to make a step. We need to make a move. You know, it's Webster Groves, all those, some of us wasn't around during that time, but it's still our legacy, it's still our history, and we should do something to make some type of justice to happen for this incident. Restorative justice is what needs to be done.
Right, thank you. Other council members?
I'm in favor of this. I think this is a good idea. I just want to understand though, in Webster was not the reason that this did not occur. In 1955, right, it was approved. No houses, only one house was built until 1964. the interim is the important part there. Those 9 years with the private industry preventing the funding. Webster effectively in 1964 had no choice after 9 years of no houses being built, but to rezone.
It's not private industry, though. It's residents.
The resident.
Sure, and I agree with that.
Okay.
That's fair. I just,
Yeah.
I'm trying to understand the timeline and also the reasons why this happened. But it seems like council, I mean, you talk about affordable housing, it seems like council had the foresight. Unfortunately, there was no follow through.
They had the foresight, David, but they didn't have the guts. Okay, they had the foresight and they approved it as long as there wasn't any pushback.
Sure.
But
Oh,
when the pushback materialized, they didn't have the guts to stand their ground and move forward. And then in addition to that, you still have the not in my backyard all around the area, saying, I'm sure that there were people that were doing bigger business with Roosevelt Bank than Benny Gordon. And so it was to their interest to
Absolutely.
side with the people that were and it's not a new story.
Yeah. no.
Fortunately, I know Gail very much. I grew up visiting the house, and we didn't know anything about this story. But what we did know was that that was a community of excellence, but we moved there right when those other houses were being displaced, when they were being torn down with it. And the problem then is the same problem that we see today. When those houses are torn down, the people that live there cannot afford to return there or remain there.
Absolutely.
And that's the same thing that in that time frame, I mean, I would say, venture to guess that even during that period of time, you couldn't fight something and just totally destroy that project in 2 years. It was a fight. It took a while. For all of that to happen, for all of that to come to fruition or what have you. But it's not a surprise, and it's not a new story.
I would push back a little bit on the comment that Webster had no choice in that, because they did have a choice on how much, on what to rezone and how much to rezone. That wasn't public land. It wasn't city land that they had to do something with. It was privately owned property. So I definitely think that the city had a choice. And I think that this reflects on the city, but also very much on the community and and what was acceptable at that time to cave under that kind of pressure. We talk about this in other municipalities in St. Louis County, and I think this story shows that we are not unique, that this happened here too, and those same sentiments were here, and it's important to recognize that.
And I agree with almost everything that's been said, right? And I think that it's important to recognize the circumstances which led to the city council making their action. I'm not defending the 1964 action by this council. I think the intermeaning 9 years is important, though. It's 9 years of one house being built. And the reason is, why did only one house being built? And that was because of outside business pressure put on by Webster citizens. And so I'm not discounting that the city of Webster Groves made an action in 1964 that was a detriment to this subdivision.
We're past
Now,
that point. Sorry.
What I am concerned about is that, Webster, I think that it's important to recognize that Webster was at the forefront in the 1950s and 60s of affordable housing. Look at South Webster. I grew up in one of those houses that was built after World War II, and that looked almost exactly like this 15 Marvin Courthouse. So,
David, the thing of it is, you're saying
Hold on.
South Webster.
Yeah,
sure,
let's
but I'm just saying, you're talking about affordable housing, you encapsulated that. And while I'm okay with us discussing that, I think that this is a separate issue. I think what this looks at is the inability of council, one, to recognize the pressure from the outside groups and citizens being in a racist manner, trying to override the 1955 action. And then also the business enterprises that failed to lend to a Black man in the 1950s. I don't think that this is necessarily an affordable housing issue. And I just don't want to conflate issues when we're nominating something for an historic preservation reason.
All right. Are there additional comments from council members?
I do have a quick question for Mara. What are the protections for this house as far as resale, renovations, et cetera?
Sure. So it would go through the process that it does for any other historic structure. So if someone did purchase it and want to demolish it, it will have a public hearing for a certificate of appropriateness before the Historic Preservation Commission. We've also talked, Ms. Jones and I have talked to about things if she wants to make certain changes to the exterior. It has a hearing before the Architecture Review Board, but she can do any changes on the interior, things on the lot. And it doesn't limit, even under historic preservation, if she wants to replace the windows, that doesn't need to go to Architecture Review Board, things like that. So there's little details, but the protections would be a hearing and discussion before demolition, as well as the hearings before the Architecture Review Board.
Thanks.
All right, I've not entered my 2 cents here, so I'd like to take a minute to do that. I was fortunate enough, Gail and I count as a friend as well. We have some mutual friends who introduced me to her. Almost a year ago now, had some breakfast and she told me the story of her family in this house. And, I've read most of the Webster history books that are available to us. And this isn't anywhere there. It's a new story, I think. And I've talked to some of my friends, including a couple in the audience who are big Webster history buffs who also didn't know about this. And I think, we have a responsibility to celebrate the positive aspects of our history, celebrate the things that are great historically about this community. But I also think that we have to own up to where we fail. And we clearly, as a community, failed in this particular circumstance. I understand the distinction that you want to make, David, between what the city council did and what residents did. But ultimately, together, white residents and a white city council made decisions that, for racist reasons, that said, we don't want these people to live near us. And I think rather than assign individual responsibility, I think we just as a community have to say we were all a part of that. And it's something that we have to own up to. And so designating 15 Marvin Court to me as a local historic structure just reminds us that we need to hold up both the history that makes us proud, but also the history that makes us really uncomfortable and doesn't make us feel good. And when we have to acknowledge that we have to do better than we have in different points in our past. Okay, so there was my soapbox statement. Is there anybody else who has from council? We have public comments. I have one, well, I actually have 2. So Reverend Danoon, if you would like to come during your public comment 3 minutes and say what you were going to say there, please go right ahead. When you come for public comments, please state your name and your address.
And you have 3 minutes.
I already said that twice. We'll see.
And she said it, yeah. David Danoon, 857 Tuxedo Boulevard. Pertinent to what you're asking, Mr. Franklin, is that in 1960, as Ms. Alexander pointed out a little while ago, there was a portion of what had, there was a portion of what had been considered North Webster that was under the authority of the St. Louis County government. And St. Louis County proposed in 1955 to build a 140 unit housing development and to finally put in electricity, water, sewer, all of the things that every other home in Webster Groves took for granted, and would make this new development. Rock Hill and Webster Groves both objected at the time, their city councils, because they felt that the educational infrastructure, as they put it, was not prepared to be receiving 140 new families in a space where there were just 14 that were taking advantage of the, frankly, the segregated high school and elementary school. The county rolled that back to 70 units, and Webster kept going back and forth with them until in 1960, Webster Groves annexed that portion of land and almost immediately created an urban renewal project that was funded by the federal government to the tune of $2.1 million to put in new housing in that area that they had just annexed and the areas immediately adjoining. Basically, and in fact, everything that we associate with North Webster was to be completely either torn down or renovated and repopulated. This particular section, this triangle, had only been part of North Webster for about 40 years at that point, from the time that First Baptist Church moved its building from Kirkham over to Brentwood. And Black people took over the neighborhood that had been Danish up until that time. In a press release, the LCRA announced that they were going to be redoing that one area that had just been annexed as residential. And they had another area, another 13-acre area that was going to be, I'm hearing it, that was to become industrial park. That may fill your gap there a little bit better. But what happened was that there was an affordable housing project that was in mind. It probably wasn't Marvin Court. Marvin Court was definitely going to be middle class, but it was, but the idea was there, and the hope was there, and the controversy was there.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for that information.
We have a second speaker card from Dave Buck.
Hey, Buck, 124 South Elm. I was a high school student in Wichita, Kansas when all this was coming down. But now as a 23-year resident blessed with some very dear Black friends, here's what I like about this ordinance. One, and contrary to popular expressions, it says to me that Webster's dark racist history, which did exist regarding this site, does not have to repeat itself, and that the past is not prologue. Call it helping to right a past wrong, better later than never. Two, it represents a needed example, as Emerson said, of a restorative justice that did not exist back in the 1960s. It helps restore honor to the life and work of Benny Gordon in his dream of the Marvin Court subdivision, and importantly, helps restore the lost dignity that Webster's current Black community has suffered over many years. As such, it brings a past darkness into the present light, and perhaps it is a beacon of hope for future progress. Three, after watching the Channel 4 news story, I met an amazing woman for the first time, Gail Jones, when one morning I drove over just to see the home firsthand. I parked on Marvin Court, which is kind of her driveway, and a white man with a scraggly beard, an old fart, total stranger, knocked on her front door. She had every reason not to open the door and asked me to leave, but instead, Gail came out on her front porch. She didn't let me in, which was a good idea. She welcomed me, and we had a really, really nice conversation about this entire opportunity and her life. In short, Gail will gain an important historic destination of her home, and I will gain an important new friend. And as I walked away, and I told my wife, Barb, when I got home, I said, a Black person meeting a white person for the first time with respect, with dignity and friendship. And I think that is a beacon of hope for the future. Thank you.
All right, I do not see any hands up on Zoom, so I think that brings the end to our portion of public comments. Mr. City Attorney, you have quite the task ahead of you.
Which I am going to make sure that I do inclusively, but as briefly and efficaciously as I can. So number one, I move for the presentation for the admission of the presentation and report presented to the Historic Preservation Committee on October the 10th, 2023. This report prepared by Director Mara Perry. Number two, I'd move for the introduction and the admission of the documentation presented this evening in the PowerPoint, including the exhaustive list of property and ownership documents that I will not read one by one, but were included in the documents that you were provided. And that was, of course, presented this evening, November the 7th of 2023. I would also ask to move for the admission of comments by speakers. And finally, the ordinances of the city of Webster Groves.
All right, thank you. That closes our public hearing. Councilmember Hickson Shepherd, could you call for the first and second reading of Bill number 9237, please?
Yes, Mayor, I'd like to call for the first and second reading of Bill number 9237.
Second.
Bill 9237, first reading. An ordinance designating and establishing the structure located at 15 Marvin Court as a city-designated historic landmark in the city and matters related thereto.
Is there additional discussion? All right, we'll have the second reading, please.
Bill 9237, second reading. An ordinance designating and establishing the structure located at 15 Marvin Court as a city-designated historic landmark in the city and matters related thereto.
All right, thank you. And so that concludes our discussion of the bill this evening. We will have third reading and a vote at our next council meeting. All right, we'll move on to remarks from visitors. Mr. Buck, please return to the microphone.
Barb asked me why I keep coming up here, and I just say, it makes me happy. This makes me happy. I'm going to call an audible. I was going to talk about the importance of peace, given what's going on in the world and the nation. But based on your work session, I'm going to talk about resident unrest, respectful unrest. Three ways. One, on the naming thing, I think park naming policy is great, except for one exception. That, as I understand it, that for elected officials, that there must be a 4-year waiting period or a cooling off period before they can have their name put on a park.
Generally.
I think that's nuts. And it's like cooling off, waiting for what? You know, what happened to strike while the iron is hot? And the thing is, this whole thing started because people want to rename the sculpture garden as the Jerry Wilt Sculpture Garden, who started the darn thing, who helped find the funding for the darn thing, who lives over on Gray. She's been out of office now for 2 years. Why wait? The policy isn't even set. So you can do whatever you want. Just do it. Just do it. God, it would be so great. And then you can have your policy in your 4-year waiting period. 2, on Webster Groves destination, I didn't hear anybody talk about the indoor pool enclosure, the $3.5 million. And the question I would have for Eric is that the number one community response was the aquatic center. The number 2 was the skate park. What was the difference in votes between those two? 1, 2, or 3? I doubt it. I bet it was hundreds. The aquatic center is the gem. It's the diamond in the rough of this community. It was an innovation 30 years ago. We can innovate again, not only by renovating the aquatic center, but by putting an indoor pool enclosure on it. And did you know that the Webster Groves boys swim team swims in state this weekend? It was a terrible program, the swim program, but the boys and girls teams have come back. They came back when Annie and Sawyer swam in 2016, 2017. They've been going to state ever since. It's a great program. They don't know where, where do they do their home meets? Where can they practice? We're renovating Moss Field for the football team in the school district. The Lodgett de Pere has the numbers about how their year-round pool is used. And if the issue is the $200,000 or $250,000 of additional operating costs, get creative. There are 9,500 households here in Webster Groves. Divide that into $250,000. That's $26 a year extra they have to pay.
Thanks, Dave. All right, is there, oh, wait a minute. I see no hands raised on Zoom, so I think we're finished with public comments. All right, is there any new business from the council member, city attorney, city manager?
No, ma'am.
All right, we'll move on to the scheduled new business and we will start with the flood buyout discussion. Where are we starting this? Dr. Peoples?
Yes, Madam Mayor. I believe Mr. Ham is going to be sharing some information with us. Before we get started, though, this has been a long, arduous process, certainly for the homeowners that were impacted by the floods. And it has been a long process in working with both SEMA and FEMA, and staff wants to recognize that. There are many questions, many applications to be filled out. The process was long. All in, it's been well over a year. And council has had a lot of previous discussions about that. You all have asked for a lot of research over the course of several meetings. And I share that because for anybody watching or even in attendance, I don't want anybody to walk away with thinking this has been the only conversation. Council has invested significant time in trying to explore the flood buyout process. So, Mr. Ham?
Before you start, Mr. Ham, I just do, so no one forgets to do this as we talk about this, on behalf of the council, want to say thank you. I know you have spent significant amount of your time working on behalf of residents, with residents, Director Perry as well. And however this turns out tonight, we are grateful for the time that you've put into that on behalf of the residents.
Sure.
So please.
All right, so bear with me here. I don't know how to really click through all this, so. Where are we going? There it is. All right. So flood property buyout. So we ended up doing, there was two projects. There was one for substantially damaged properties, which were HMGP. And there were two that came to our attention after we initially submitted this that were classified as repetitive loss. Those two are in red on your map. You got the three by the two red ones, and then down in the kind of the bottom right-hand corner, there's the Coolman property, which is removed, but still part of that original substantially damaged project. My mouse is going crazy. Oh, there we go. All right. There we go. Well, now you can see it. Nice. All right. So this is basically just information on the properties, when they were built. I believe that was some of the questions we had. When they were built, was the property in the floodplain purchased? How the maps changed, their appraised value. I think it's important to note that that is an estimate, and that is an estimate that was given with input from SEMA. So we took county's numbers, we added 30% basically to what it was at the time. The only one that's different is 839 North Forest, which did sell. Since it sold, FEMA will only honor the sale price. So if it's appraised at $1 million, the max they can receive is $50,000 that they bought it for. As far as the floodplain, so most of these properties, all of these properties were in the floodplain when they were purchased. As far as the flood insurance, that's FEMA information. They count that as personal information, and it is almost impossible to get that out of them. We know a few of them did have it. There's a couple that are kind of question marks. SEMA was not surprised that folks did not have it. It seems to be a pretty normal thing. Their only requirement is that they carry it throughout this process. However, this process ends once this is over. If we purchase the homes, they don't have to carry it, obviously. If it's not a purchase situation, they can then drop it. SEMA is not going to come looking for them. So, and then the floodplain maps have not changed substantially since they went into effect. There's probably minor tweaks here and there, but generally speaking, for these properties, there was no change. And we're running into the ferments, which kind of shows you where the properties are located. This is Coolman. It's out on its own. It's this little, I don't know if I can see this, but this little red circle right in the middle of these floodplain here. And then this is the front of Coolman. And all these houses were generally well maintained at the time of the event, and the owners are still keeping them up now, which is kind of a task since none of them are living there.
So these are the other 5 properties. The 2 on the right are the repetitive loss properties, which are on a different project. That's the project that FEMA came out with a few months ago. They said that it had preliminarily been approved. They need further review. The 3 on the left are part of that HMGP project that we're discussing tonight. All right, so 834 North Forest is the one across the street from 839 North Forest, which is the one that sold. I don't know if you guys have questions about the properties on them once again. You guys are making it fun. All right, and then 830 Pacific is backs up to the North Forest properties. And then here are some questions that were given to me. I think I answered the ones I could. If you guys have any other questions, 1 and 2 are kind of above my pay grade, out of my wheelhouse. 7 is sort of the same. And then I think 3 through 6 we've answered. So are there any other questions?
Thank you, Mr. Ham. Those 1 and 2 were really for council to have conversations, but I was
There you
hoping
go.
you'd give it a whirl.
All
So,
right.
thank you. I appreciate that.
Can I ask a question just about, this proportional share, the share between the federal government and the local government? How long has that been around? Do you know?
I have no idea. I'm going to say in the 70s when the flood stuff started really becoming a focus.
Can you refresh our memory? We approved the buyout of the repetitive loss homes. What is happening with those right now?
They're still just in FEMA process, but this council, you're correct. So when
Okay.
we finally receive that notification, because they're preliminarily approved, I believe that's the language.
Yep.
When we finally receive that notification, council has already given me the authority to move forward with those 2 purchases.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Peoples, but our budget, there's at least $500,000 that we budgeted for the buyout, correct?
That's correct. The questions that you see on the slide, pardon me, Mayor, didn't mean to interrupt. I've had the opportunity and pleasure of speaking with the majority of you, meeting with the majority of you regarding this. And again, there's been a lot of heartfelt discussion over it. What you see on the screen there really captures some of the outstanding questions that were kind of a common theme. So they're just there as you all have your discussions.
And I know that when we were working on the budget and we set that amount aside, that was still with a clear understanding that that wasn't an agreement.
Correct.
To move forward with this. Because the thing that's still, I think that we still need to address and be ready to address is the precedent that's being set, because we still have other homes and properties up through the Kirkham area over there that's continuously flooded, and the damage and everything that comes along with that. And I don't know how we address the precedent that's being set. I don't know how we do that for some, and then we don't address other homeowners that are in repetitive flood areas. And then how do we look at the financial obligation and the precedent that we're setting by doing that? I just don't, and unfortunately, or fortunately, I mean, people make decisions based upon what's best for them at the time. And when we look at this information that's on this page, if the properties were in a flood zone, I think some of them had flood insurance, some didn't. I know if you have a mortgage, being in the mortgage business for 30 years, you have to have flood insurance. Now, if you pay your house off, then you make the choice not to carry it any further. Then that's one thing. But I also think that we have to think hard. I have to think in terms of my vote or what have you. How am I doing a disservice to the other residents of Webster, because individuals that made a conscious decision to buy and in a flood zone and it didn't quite work out? Now, is it right to expect other taxpayers to then cover that cost, as well as taking almost a double hit, because now those properties come off of the tax bracket? You can't build anything back there. And I just think that it's not like we're asking other residents to, number one, pay for a choice that they didn't make. And then number two, we're setting a precedent of having to now either repeat this when it occurs with other homeowners, or be in a position to now say, wow, your house isn't worthy of this when the others were.
Right. Other comments from council?
I have some questions and then I'll have some comments. Do we know how many other homes are in the floodplain?
We do. I don't have that number in front of me, but there's a list. Yeah, I can get you the number.
Okay.
It's a significant number.
But you're talking about this floodplain or
No,
all floodplains in Webster?
Floodplain in Webster Groves.
Everyone's in a flip.
And then I was just curious about, I guess we don't know the percentage of flooding that these homes have. That, we say that they flood a lot, but we don't know how much.
No, so the last one that I know about is 2008. I believe these homes or some of these homes flooded. Before that, I have no record.
Okay, okay. I believe that because these structures should not have been built in the floodplain in the first place. I think by being built in the floodplain and assuming someone can reside there, I think you're automatically marketing to those that may not have a choice to live anywhere else in Webster. If Webster's the destination, they have to go to these less desirable properties. I don't think that's a good rationale for us to create a community in Webster. To me, the structure should be removed. The flooding is going to keep occurring. I think we should not rely, but we should take the cue from FEMA that they have approved these homes for buyout. They're going to give us 3/4 of the money for it. If it does happen again, it's only going to cost more later. And I can continue, but I think you've got my point of view on it.
So I think all these properties were built before the floodplain went into place. So obviously they were down there, they were probably getting flooded. But they're all pre-firm structures, so they were all in place when the flood maps went into effect.
Yeah, for me, the most important question I see on your spreadsheet, was the property in a floodplain when purchased? Yes, so they had to be aware of whatever fear they had or whatever problems that could happen by being in the floodplain. And then have the floodplains changed since purchase? That answer is no. So they need a strategic decision to buy that house knowing that it could flood. And regardless if it was a 100-year flood or whatever, but the government put it in the floodplain. So it was their decision to buy those homes in the floodplain. And for those that, I see one here that it was no longer a loan, and they optioned out to continue to buy flood insurance. So those are risks that these homeowners had to take, or they did take.
Can you just remind me, if we opt not to participate in the buyout, the FEMA money does not come through for these homeowners, correct?
That's, so they would still, I believe, have the option to get assistance from FEMA, but it would be assistance to sort of repair their homes, not
a buyout.
There's not a demolition.
It's not like a
in their
partial
future.
buyout, basically. It's like that part goes away.
And did we find out if the 25% portion could be, has to all be paid by the city, or if the homeowners could pay part of that 25%? I know that was a question when we talked about this.
When we talked about it earlier, that was certainly a question, and Mr. Ham, please correct me if I'm wrong. I believe that was a question that SEMA or FEMA told us hadn't been asked, and so there was quite a bit of back and forth regarding that. I believe the outcome of that was that yes, it could be cost split with the homeowners or fully paid by the homeowners. I do
So
want to mention
basically-
that I apologize, the 25% is for the home purchase, which would be the city's portion. There's still the demolition costs, which are separate as well.
But we could theoretically craft something where the homeowners pay a portion of that 25%, the city covers the demo and then something like that.
Council certainly could.
Could do like a cost share.
All right, additional comments or questions? All right, I think in order to move forward, we have to have a motion from someone to approve these buyouts. I don't know how serious you are about pursuing this other option, but you know, we actually at some point are gonna have to take some action. I don't think we really have many unresolved questions. So if someone would like to make a motion that we participate in the buyout of these 4 homes, or if there are particular homes that you would like for us to focus on, make a motion on particular homes. But without a motion, I'm going to assume that we are not moving forward.
Is it all or nothing?
No,
No.
we could do one by one.
We could do one by one.
May I ask if there's a motion that we actually specify the property in the motion
Okay.
itself? So that it's clear what we're voting on.
And we can make multiple motions, right? So
Correct.
I brought lots of sheets.
So I'll make a motion for the first 2 properties, the one on Pacific and the one on Coolman. Sorry, I can't quite see the numbers. Sorry, 838 Pacific and 1051 Coolman, that the city participate in the buyouts for at least those 2 properties.
Second.
All right. Is there further discussion
Yeah, so
on?
what makes those, what designating those properties?
They both had flood insurance, and the other 2, one didn't have flood insurance and one was recently sold. So I thought those 2 were cleaner. And that they had flood insurance and they haven't been recently sold.
But they opted to build a home, live in a flood. Like,
They purchased a home in the floodplain. They did.
Madam Mayor, may I make a
Please.
quick comment? If there is a decision, and again, I don't know how this will go and where we're going ultimately, but I think you have to articulate the reasons, particularly if we are going to vote yes on some and no on others. So again, and if I were just to pick any one of these homes, if I were one of these homeowners and for whatever reason I was denied, but the other 3 were done, my argument would be, this seems to be an arbitrary decision one way or another. So I think we have to make sure that whatever we're doing, that there is an articulable reason for what it is we're doing. Or if we're not doing something, that we're able to state exactly why that is. Otherwise, we risk the possibility that we would find ourselves in litigation.
Right. Would you like to restate
I'm
for
not
us?
sure how to craft it.
Well, the motion,
In play, the motion is fine. So just why are only those 2 homes subject to your motion? I mean, you pretty much said it to Karen, but I think maybe if
Yeah,
you
I mean,
elaborate a little
I'm
bit.
personally in favor of probably of all 4 of them, but I know that might not be where all council is. So I picked the ones that I thought were the cleanest cases, and they both had flood insurance, and they're both still owned by the people who owned them at the time of the flooding. Is that?
that's
Clear
plenty.
enough?
It just
Okay.
has to be something articulable that someone could look at and say, that's not an arbitrary decision.
I'm not necessarily opposed to the other 2, but this motion is for those first 2.
Do we know what percentages on all 4 of those are of damage to these homes? Or can you please tell us?
They were all over 50%. They were all, I think, the 2.
Okay.
Let's do a map here. So the one on Coolman had 4 feet of water in it, and it was probably 75 to 80%. East Pacific and the North Forest property probably had 3 feet of water. They were probably around the same percentage. The one on Forest, sorry, 834, the one across the street, is built a little higher, so it had a little less water in it, but but it was still over a substantial damage mark.
And when you say 4 feet of water, are you saying in the basement?
That's all from
Oh,
the main floor of the house.
okay.
So in the case of Coolman, there's probably an 9-foot ceiling in the basement. It was full of water, and there was an
Plus
additional
water.
4 feet of water
Mhm.
on the main level.
I did go around all of these sites. I got out of my car, I looked at them, walked around. So you could kind of see the conditions of these sites. They're not flat, some of them are kind of in a bowl. So, you can see how it would exacerbate a problem
Sure.
if it were to flood.
And none of them are inhabitable today, correct?
None of them are able to be occupied today.
Right, that's what I mean. Thanks.
The FEMA's portion, to understand, they will receive the FEMA portion.
So they're able to apply for aid from FEMA. Now, whether FEMA approves them or not is up to FEMA. We've had, I believe, a couple applied and they were given money. Some folks have applied and haven't heard anything. That's sort of up to FEMA. Anybody who did receive aid already, if there is a buyout, the amount they receive in aid would be subtracted from FEMA's portion, basically. So if FEMA already gave them $30,000, whatever that 75% of FEMA's is, would be minus that $30,000.
So we will be responsible for the demolition
Yes.
of those homes.
Yes, sir.
But so did you-
Regardless if we pay the 25% or not.
So as I understand it, are you talking about, pardon me, if there were a cost split with the homeowners, would we still be responsible for the demolition? Is that the question?
The homeowners say, FEMA would give the homeowner their offer. But once that offer is done, are we responsible for the demolition of that house?
I don't believe so, but I don't know for sure because that would be a private agreement between FEMA and that homeowner. So I do not believe that could commit the city to being responsible for demolition cost.
But did you say that, if FEMA went forward with the 75%, that the homeowner could pay the 25?
That is correct.
Yes.
So someone could amend my motion to add language like that, right? Having the homeowner pay the 25%.
Yes, I believe your
Yes.
amendment could be.
So you're gonna amend your motion?
No, I'm just theoretically, if someone wanted the homeowners to get the 75% from FEMA and didn't want to commit the city to the full 25, somebody could amend my motion to say what they were comfortable with.
And let's remember, if we do that, we're not talking about an insignificant amount of money. The 25% is 75, almost $76,000, $60,000, $80,000 and
It is
12. So
yeah.
let's not, I don't want us to mislead ourselves and think, oh, well, this is just
It's
a little
nothing,
small
yeah.
amount of money here.
And it wouldn't have to be, it could be anywhere from all of that to none of that we asked them to share.
Right.
If I can, I think the buyout is predicated on us actually purchasing and demolishing the properties. I think if the city kind of steps back and lets it be between FEMA and the homeowner, I don't know how I don't know that that'll work. I think these projects will go away. And I think then it would just revert to a FEMA giving them aid to fix or whatever, unless the homeowners paid the 25% with the understanding that the city would be taking possession of the properties.
Right.
I mean, I think if I were a homeowner, I would just pay the $20,000 to demolish my home and walk away, and I'd still own the land. I don't know why I would give the house and 25% of the sale price to make it a green space. I mean, kind of just be like a private citizen and do your own self-needed green space, and maybe it'll be viable and somebody will, want to buy it that way. So it just doesn't make sense that we would want the homeowner to kick in money for this.
I'm not proposing that we
Yeah,
do.
I'm
it's
just,
an option.
we're talking about it and it
Mhm.
doesn't make sense to me.
Okay, yes, Dr. Peoples.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I was just going to comment on the first question that was on that list regarding setting precedent. Not that the motion from Councilwoman Hickson Shepherd has moved forward yet, but if it did, as we talked about setting precedent, that would set precedent for those parameters. Since they had flood insurance, the things that you outlined. And I think it's really important as council moves forward, as we talk about future flooding events, that should you all move forward, that we will be setting precedent and we would probably need to stick with those same parameters next time around.
When we say we're setting a precedent, does that mean we're setting an expectation or does that mean we're setting a legal precedent that we would have to do it?
We're actually setting a legal precedent
Okay.
because what we're doing is we're saying these are the things, as council, these are the things that we think are important in determining a buyout. So again, take another piece of property in another location in the city that would have the things that you pointed out, that it's still owned by the people that owned it at the time of the flooding and they had insurance on the property itself. If they were in a position where there could be potentially a buyout, they would come to you as council and say, we would like you to do this. We meet your criteria because we have these two things. Now, again, you still have to plug in the FEMA issues and
Yeah.
their portions and then so, but let's assume that they meet that level. You would be hard pressed not to do it.
Okay.
Okay.
I mean, I do think that not stated in the motion, but in the slide is that you're substantially damaged and that SEMA and FEMA have approved them for a buyout. So those would be I would consider as part of the precedent too.
I definitely think the precedent question is extremely important, but I also think the purpose behind this is important too. Like I did some research on the history of these buyouts, and the purpose was not only to ensure lack of flooding in the future, which would decrease assistance in the time of need, but also for safety. And so, I mean, I think to myself, like, what is that line here in Webster Groves to meet those two prongs or to meet that purpose that was originally enacted for this buyout program? But I also think that more fundamentally, it's like, I don't know if this council or this government, local government, despite the idea of sharing the costs with the federal government, whether citizens have really taken into account the consequences of global warming and the impact it's going to have and the precedent that sets. In other words, should local government be involved in the remediation of global warming? And I think that we are doing that from going forward, but looking back, I think is a different question. And for me, I think that this should be a policy question that's posed to the citizens via a referendum of some matter saying, do you want council to concentrate on repairing the harm from global warming that is now being caused rather than just looking forward? Because right now, all of our sustainability actions are forward thinking rather than past thinking. And what we're doing here is remediating an issue because of past consequences and because of past consequences of human activity.
But it's also to prevent those future consequences too, right? So it's not just looking backward, it's also looking forward. So if you're returning the land to be, unbuilt, then you're also mitigating the flooding for the future. That is part of the point of returning these to
It's a fair point, Sarah. Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing is we're lucky because this one event happened in the wee hours of the morning that nothing happened to any lives of the residents.
Yeah.
Because again, it's not standing flooding water. There's, moving water, et cetera, that has the power to do a lot of damage. So I feel like we need to be aware that this is going to happen again. And the risk is going to always be there and it's going to be more expensive later. That's one, yeah.
Which reaffirms the precedent concern that then we will constantly be faced with the expectation that we make people whole when this happens. And those are decisions that people made, and I mean, just to mention before, just when these houses were built, flood maps weren't even in existence yet. FEMA wasn't even in existence. FEMA came into existence in those flood maps in the early 60s, I think 64, 68, something like that, 68. So even the statement that Webster shouldn't have allowed them to build there, it wasn't anything that was even on the books that builders and cities and municipalities considered. But again, if we are expecting that this is going to continue, then that's all the more reason to be very conscious of the precedent and the expectation that's being set, that people have the ability to make the decisions the purchase decisions that they want to make. But now they can expect that, well, if it doesn't work out for me, that's.
I think another thing to consider is how those private decisions also impact their neighbors, right? So they, these flooded properties affect their whole neighborhood. It's a community. It's not only one isolated home that we're thinking about. And my hope would be that if we did decide to purchase these and turn those into green space, that we could do it in a way to protect some of those other homes that we're not buying out, so that they don't flood the next time, because we'd have some more mitigation in place from these properties.
To me, that's if there is an incentive, that's the primary incentive. Because it then benefits the community. It's not just benefiting the one.
Well, and I mean, I think we could set up, if we really wanted to think about the community, those other homes, we could provide, flood safety measures, educate those people a little bit more, maybe provide a flood warning system or something. I mean, how did we know that was happening? Was there any sort of, can't think of the word.
Like a flash flood warning.
Surveillance or whatever was to see if the flooding was happening. Do we have that, or does it just happen and, it's a phone call? I think there's other things we can do that would benefit the other residents in that area that wouldn't mean just buying them out.
I will say though, when we talk about this in terms of, it is a neighborhood, we're still talking about a handful of residents, and we're asking the rest of the broader community to subsidize that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and you didn't say it loud enough for the microphone, but what Sarah said is that's what's hard. And I agree, that's exactly what's hard about this, is that I think, given my own personal opinion, I'd buy these people out in a heartbeat, but it's not my money to spend. And that's why I worry, along with what Councilwoman Alexander's been saying about, if we're setting especially a legal precedent, then we're talking about over and over when we talk about the budget, our long-term commitment to fiscal stability. If we're committing ourselves to this based on the precedent we set today, I don't know how, I can't think about what the fiscal stability in the long run looks like. Now, I think David raises an interesting point. Maybe it's that we go to the voters and say, all right, we'd like to start a fund that takes whatever amount of tax that we build to do buyouts as they become available. Or not available, that's a terrible way to put it. I apologize. As they become needed. That makes a little bit of sense to me, because that's the broader community making the choice. But I think it's hard for me. The precedent part is, and yes, do I feel terrible about thinking that way? Absolutely, I do.
We have the precedent that we voted the repetitive loss ones too. Like, we've
Correct.
kind of set a precedent for ourselves too. I guess my concern is I think these will end up being a repetitive loss eventually, and then I think it's gonna be more expensive than if we just did it now.
I mean, this is a high bar. These homes hit a high bar to me.
That's why there's not very many of them.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because
Right.
not everything qualifies.
Right.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, but keep in mind, this
A
number
number,
is a fungible number. So it's subject to appraisal and assessment. So again, while we have this number, while this was in the information that Travis had as he put the information together, there ultimately has to be an appraisal that gets done. So this number is not a hard number.
And then another thing, and I can't speak for everybody else, but for me, but just the way this all kind of played out, when we were presented with those two properties, I didn't expect to be followed up by these other four, and it was 90%, with the city only doing 10%. And if I think about it, and there still may have been other costs there. So there was,
If you don't mind, Karen, I think maybe what you might be suggesting is, yeah, there's a precedent in what we set, but the conditions for the precedent, it's a higher bar even than this bar. And I agree with you that this is a high bar.
Well, and just the number and going back to the quantity of the houses, and this is not to diminish those that have been damaged, because I can only imagine what they've been through, but the fact of the matter is there's 4 this flood. What's the next flood?
Right.
And we're gonna see this more and more, and that's the thing that concerns me, at least from a precedential standpoint, is if we are going the route that we are going with regards to climate change, I think that our flooding in Webster Groves is only gonna increase, and the damage that we see is only gonna increase. And the question is, what does local government have a responsibility to do?
What's your answer to that?
He said, put it to the voters.
I mean, frankly, I think that this is I'm not saying that we would have a designated tax, but I do think the voters should have a say in this. I think that they should have a say, because I don't think when Webster Groves was imagined, I don't think that over the past 20 years, that voters ever thought that their tax dollars would be used to buy out other citizens in Webster Groves because of flooding. Now, maybe they're okay with that, but let the voters decide, in my mind.
The Army Corps of Engineers would say that it is the municipality's responsibility for managing the floodplain, or, getting structures out of the floodplain. That's not a question that's not answered.
Well, the Army Corps of Engineers is saying that, but still, they're not the taxpayers that's paying it. That's not what, if they say that, they're saying, basically, but what they're saying is that they're not gonna take responsibility for it. So, if, again, we expect the taxpayers to pay it, then I'm in agreement with David. We need to, in some type of way, put that to them so that they can address it. And I think we should ask them to address it before we do it, not after.
So are we talking about putting it on before the ballots as?
Oh,
Oh, no. That's not part of this motion. That's just a general discussion.
I'm just
We
thinking.
can talk about things in
theoretically for us.
theoretically, but if we say like it should go before the voters, like I think we need to really consider, are we just talking? Or are we actually gonna propose to put something on a ballot in the future?
That's a fair
I
question.
would say, I would not turn for that. No, I don't want to put it on the ballot.
So we're just like,
Why?
then we're just talking.
Well, I'll just come on. and say it.
Well,
They
that's
purchased
just one
that,
vote.
Yeah.
They purchased this house August the 20th, 2023.
That's,
But the person that sold it to them knew this was going on and it was in the floodplain. They sold it.
that's the $50,000.
Well,
I mean.
it was damaged.
yeah. That's not,
already, so
that
that's
wasn't
not-
one that I put in.
Yeah.
Yeah, so let's stick to the ones that are the subject of the motion, and we're going around in circles right now.
Yeah.
And I think we need to stop doing that. And so if anyone has a new point that they would like to make, I think we can entertain that. But at the moment, we have a motion that's been seconded to go ahead and approve for 838 East Pacific and 1051 Coolman Lane, the 75-25 buyout.
Is it possible to amend the motion?
It is.
Okay, I would amend the motion to, I think we've already established substantially damaged. And
So, hold on a second. I'm sorry to interrupt, but Neil's nodding at me. Neil, would you like to tell?
So if your concern is making sure we articulate the purposes, the
Yeah.
conversation has done the same. So
Okay.
the motion can still be narrow. It's the
Okay.
reasons upon which the motion was
Okay,
considered. that
okay.
would- and that's all been stated for you in your conversation.
So I would like to amend the motion to add 834 North Forest for the reason that they said they are interested in the buyout.
Okay,
the three
is there a
purposes.
second on the amendment?
Second.
We have a second on the amendment. Discussion of the amendment.
On the amendment, I think it's maybe a cleaner line. The one that was most recently sold makes the least sense to me in terms of the buyout. So to me, the 3 makes more sense maybe than the 2.
And we just don't know whether they're interested or not. We don't know. So that's a good indicator.
What about the recent purchase makes
The question mark on the top line.
Yeah, no, but
Why
So-
exclude them?
Yeah, why exclude them other than they were purchased recently? I understand that the interested in buyout, but that wasn't part of the initial justification. So I'm just trying to understand what the purchase date has to do with this.
Because it was post-flood, because it essentially was bought out.
But I mean, if you, again, if you go to the purpose of this buyout, it's for safety and to remediate. So aren't we literally doing the exact opposite if we exclude one of them?
We don't know if
Okay,
they wanna
okay,
do it.
so can we
No,
hang
that's a
on a
different
minute?
justification.
We have a
That's what I
motion.
said.
Oh,
We have a motion before us that will add 834 North Forest. So far, we have no motion that has anything to do with 839 North Forest. So can we stick to what we have in front of us, please?
But the removal of one is a demonstration of the other three in my mind. So that's why I'm bringing it up. Like what is different about this one compared to the other three that it was not included? And that helps understand why the other three were included. in
Because they
it.
have not answered yes.
Mr. Ham, have we heard back from them since? this
I've
was put
been
together?
unable to contact the new owners.
Thank you.
Right. Okay, is there further discussion? Are we ready for a vote on the amendment to add 834 North Forest to the amendment that included the other two properties, 838 and 1051? Are we ready for that vote? All right.
That's for the amendment only.
Yes, we are voting on the amendment right now.
Yes, Mayor. Mayor Arnold,
No.
I don't even understand. but-
Councilmember Bliss,
No means I do not want to add 834 North Forest to these properties that we are considering for a buyout.
Councilmember Bliss,
Yes.
yes. Councilmember Franklin,
No.
Councilmember Smith,
No.
Councilmember Alexander,
No,
Councilmember Richardson,
Yes.
Councilmember Hickson Shepherd.
No. All right, the amendment fails. We now are considering the motion for that pertains to 838 East Pacific and 1051 Coolman. Is there additional discussion on the motion?
So I know it's my motion. But I do want to say I am really hearing that it's a legal precedent that could put us at risk does give me more pause than a precedent of expectations, which is what I was thinking of previously.
Additional discussion? All right, are we ready to have the vote then?
and now we're voting on.
So a yes vote in this case would mean we are agreeing to the FEMA buyouts. A no vote would mean we do not want to pursue the FEMA buyout for these two particular properties. Said that correctly?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, let's go.
Councilmember Bliss,
Yes.
Councilmember Franklin,
No.
Councilmember Smith,
No.
Councilmember Alexander,
No,
Councilmember Richardson,
Yes.
Councilmember Hickson Shepherd,
No.
Mayor Arnold.
No. All right, now I think we do need to take to heart the conversation about looking forward and thinking about, I guess, so I should say the motion fails, which means we will not proceed with these particular properties through the FEMA buyout. Having said that, we do have, I think, some discussions to have about, are there alternative ways that we want to put to our community? What is it that we as a community want to be responsible for moving forward, since our expectation is that there are going to be more flood events and we're going to deal with this on an ongoing basis. Does that sum up where we are, I think? This is a quiet group now all of a
Just the
sudden.
effects of.
I'm not ready to have that conversation. I just like, I mean, I think there's a lot to consider.
Oh, not right now.
Yeah,
I
'cause
didn't
I'm
mean at
like-
this moment.
Please don't.
Well, we're gonna move on now to our next order of new business. We haven't even gotten to the old business yet. Which is the Charter Review Advisory Board recommendations.
What would we about the other two?
No one moved for them to be included, so they are not included. Do we need should we take a formal vote to say no? There was no motion in place, so,
I mean, we had one in there.
and then it got voted out, yeah.
So the other two properties are important.
The Congressional Budget Office released a memo just in August about this flood buyout program. They indicated that the political question posed to local government about whether to buy it or not was one of the biggest deficits in this program, and they're looking to just have FEMA pay the whole thing eventually. Not everything gets funded.
Nice.
But hopefully if this were to happen more and more, we have less of a say as the local government, because FEMA would just do it, pay for it.
Probably have to prepare the submittal though.
Yeah. All right, let's move ahead to our CRAB report review. We have a number of items today. The way I suggest we proceed is that we go ahead and read the language. If there's discussion about it, we can have that discussion. And then we will simply need to decide whether we would like the city attorney to draft language on this particular proposal. We don't have to formally vote because we don't have that language in front of us yet. Some of these are going to be, I think, minimal, if any discussion at all. So I'm just going to go down the line. And hopefully the page numbers matched your copy of the reports. If not, they
There
didn't.
was one that was.
Okay, sorry about that. I guess we should, maybe what we'll do if we don't mind is keep a set of the reports. We'll print off a set and keep them here. So each of us has access to a hard copy every time we do this.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, well, let's start with item number, it'd be Article 2.12. It's the publication of information. The issue here is the charter language related to information publication and sharing is outdated and no longer practical or in use. So the change here is simply that rather than having things posted at City Hall and in the public library, the language will read, shall be published in contemporary means of information sharing and made available for public inspection. And then we will, they are recommending a deletion of the 10 copies be available at the council meeting as well. Simple enough. This one's straightforward. Is there any discussion needed? Would we like to instruct the city attorney to draft language? All right, let's do that, Mr. City Attorney, and we'll check that one off the list. 5.18 is contained outdated. 5.18.2 contains outdated language, which includes insane asylums, orphan asylums, poorhouse, workhouse is. And so we would delete, the recommendation is to delete insane asylums, orphan asylums, poorhouses, workhouses, and insert mental health facilities. Any discussion?
I think it's a change that needs to be made.
Yep. All right, Mr. Sturdy, we're just gonna start adding to your list there.
Yes, ma'am.
5.6, which I guess I should be telling you page numbers, but I don't know that I have the right ones. 22. This is about auditing. Charter requirement for the city staff to submit the annual audit 45 days after the close of the fiscal year is impractical to meet, especially since we don't even have the sales tax data yet. So the change would be to strike 45th day and insert the last day of the 6th month after the close of the fiscal year. Discussion?
Makes sense.
All right. 7.6. Classification of employees, and that's page 27. Existing language is out of compliance with federal employment law is the reason for the recommendation. Right now, the section reads, the unclassified service shall include the city manager, assistant city manager, directors of all departments, members of the advisory and administrative boards, municipal court judge, city clerk, and secretary to the city manager. Don't you wish there was one? And so this language would be struck, and most of that language would be struck, and it would simply read, the unclassified service shall include all personnel that are exempt from overtime provisions under the Fair Labor Standards Act. Right, I see a lot of nodding, so I'm going to check that as a yes as well. So you're all going to speak up, right, when objections come? 'Cause at some point there might be one. 7.12, which is on page 29. The issue here, existing charter language is out of date with respect to personal characteristics the city cannot use in making hiring or promotion decisions. And so rather than reading you this language, the insertion is based on current law as well as the DEI statement of the city of Webster Grove, so that they include the same thing. And then an addition from the Charter Review Advisory Board is to insert, this section shall not be construed to prohibit any person from active participation in political campaigns at any other level of government. So our employees are out of the business of local government elections, but certainly their political rights are protected at any other level. All right, nodding in that one. Next is Police and Fire Retirement Fund on page 19. Don't know why these are out of page order. We don't use this, it doesn't exist, and the recommendation is to simply excise it from the charter.
Agreed.
All right. Last two are the city clerk's favorites. 13.4 on page 32. Which is the preparation of ballots is currently written. We don't comply with state law, the requirements of the County Board of Elections and current practice, including also there's a little bit of gendered language in there, councilmen. So we get rid of the men there. And on the second page, strike out how we currently demand that the names of candidates in the election notices be printed in alphabetical order. We don't do that anymore. And so it would be simply insert the ballot shall be prepared consistent with the powers of the St. Louis County Board of Election Commissioners and the Missouri Revised Statutes.
Yes, that will remove some confusion.
Yes, it will remove some confusion. And the last one for today is on page 35, section 14.9 on voting. The existing language is not consistent with the requirements of the St. Louis County Board of Election Commissioners and Missouri statutes. So I'm not going to read the language because it really is a matter of excising everything that is inconsistent and then adding at the end of the section, the ballot used in voting upon any such ordinance shall be prepared consistent with Missouri Revised Statutes and the requirements of the St. Louis County Board of Election Commissioners. Again, flexibility so that we do the right thing no matter how many times they change their mind. And our city attorney is smiling because he can actually write language that conforms with requirements.
That was painless.
With none of the rest of them are going to be this painless, just so you know.
Should
So
we save these for the end then, like when we need a break from the painful?
I do have a question.
yes,
Since we're out of compliance with state law, can there be something in the charter to say that we can make changes if we fall out of compliance, or we have to wait 10 years to fix it?
Well, you don't ever have to wait 10 years to fix it. You always have the power to fix it. Okay, but you as council would simply have to make, again, a recommendation that it go to the voters and the voters change it. But that can be done anytime. That doesn't have to wait for the eight years that is in the charter that says you must do every year.
Something in the charter, way out of compliance, but you might feel that it's a exposure to.
Yes.
We have to spend the money, put it on the ballot.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
or just pretend that we're not.
Yes, we're not reading.
All right, so I didn't bring my charter schedule with me, but I believe next on the list is to decide whether or not we want to put together a group to get specific about what a hybrid voting system would look like. So please make sure that you've read that information. And again, I'll send another memo that gives you hopefully the correct page numbers and the items for consideration.
Madam Mayor, quickly, you asked for printed copies. The appendix has been delivered by the Charter Review Board, the full appendix. So the report is now about 300 pages.
No appendices, how about?
Well, they're already being printed, so you're going to
Oh.
all have a spiral bound version of the CRAB report to have. So we'll have that all for you.
Okay, thank you very much. All right. We're going to move on to item number 3 in new business. And Council Member Alexander, could you call for the first and second reading of Bill number 9238?
Yes, I would like to call for the first and second reading of bill number 9238.
Do I have a second?
Second, anyone?
Second.
Bill 9238, first reading. An ordinance authorizing the city manager to execute an agreement with the Missouri Highways and Transportation Commission Surface Transportation Block Grant, STBG, program agreement for the design and construction of resurfacing, construct shared use path and curb and gutter, Elm Avenue from Glendale Road to Watson Road, federal project number STBG 5577, parent 640N parent.
Is there any discussion?
So this was something that was in Balancing Act, right? For possible inclusion in Destination WG or no?
Madam Mayor and members, it was included in the conversation we had the last meeting, and you had directed us to take it out of the list of projects that we submitted to the community.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
but it would be a qualifying project should you want to make match from the bonds.
Thank you.
All right. Any further discussion, questions? I'm just going to say it's really exciting.
Yeah, it
And
is.
let's go ahead and have that second reading.
Bill 9238, second reading. An ordinance authorizing the city manager to execute an agreement with the Missouri Highways and Transportation Commission Surface Transportation Block Grant, STBG, program agreement for the design and construction of resurfacing, construct shared use path and curb and gutter, Elm Avenue from Glendale Road to Watson Road, federal project number STBG 5577, parent 640N parent.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Franklin, could you call for the first, second, and third reading of Bill number 9239, please?
Yes, Madam Mayor, I'd like to call for the first, second, and third reading of bill number 9239.
Second.
And do we have a stated reason for the?
We
third?
do need to have a motion for the compelling reason being
Got it.
that they need to get it in place, the agreement. in
We'll do
place.
that after the second reading.
Sure.
Okay. All right. Was there a second? Yes.
Yes. Sarah
Bill
was just-
9239, first reading. In ordinance authorizing the city manager to execute a first amendment to the ground leased with Cellco Partnership DBA Version Wireless and matters related thereto. Is it Version or Verizon?
I think it's Verizon.
Yeah.
All right. Any discussion? Second reading, please.
Bill 9239, second reading. In ordinance authorizing the city manager to execute a first amendment to the ground lease with Cellco Partnership doing business as Verizon Wireless and matters related thereto.
All right. I will now entertain a motion to go ahead with the third reading.
Yes, Madam Mayor, I'd like to move to have a third reading of bill number 9239 due to the fact that that the amendment to the lease needs to be in place as soon as possible.
Second.
That requires a vote.
All right, let's have a vote. Thank you, Dave.
Councilmember Bliss,
Yes.
Councilmember Franklin,
Yes.
Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
Councilmember Alexander,
Yeah.
Councilmember Richardson,
Yes.
Councilmember Hickson Shepherd,
Yes.
Mayor Arnold.
Yes.
Having fully articulated a reason and having voted upon, do you want me to do the third reading?
I would love for you to do the third reading.
Bill 9239, third and final reading. An ordinance authorizing the city manager to execute a first amendment to the ground lease with Cellco Partnership doing business as Verizon Wireless and matters related thereto.
Is there any discussion? Let's have that final vote, please.
Councilmember Franklin,
Yes.
Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
Councilmember Alexander,
Yes.
Councilmember Richardson,
Yes.
Councilmember Hickson Shepherd,
Yes.
Mayor Arnold,
Yes.
Councilmember Bliss.
Yes.
All right. Is there anyone who would like to remove anything from the consent agenda? All right. Councilmember Bliss, could you call for the approval of the consent agenda, please?
Yes, I can. Mayor, I call for the approval of the consent agenda and subsequent adoption.
Second.
We don't discuss the consent agenda, so let's
typically
just
we-
vote.
Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
Councilmember Alexander,
Yes.
Councilmember Richardson,
Yes.
Councilmember Hickson Shepherd,
Yes.
Mayor Arnold,
Yes.
Councilmember Bliss,
Yes.
Councilmember Franklin.
Yes.
All right. We have reappointed Debbie Sahlberg to the Board of Adjustment. And I would like to extend my gratitude to my colleagues and to staff for allowing us to have a thoughtful conversation on a lot of things this evening. So thank you for that. And I believe we are adjourned?
No
Am I-
closed session?
I'm afraid to say the word, but we are adjourned.